Chapter 10. Breaking up is hard to do.
Oh, by the way, a quick reminder, if you like this Beatles content, check out our new book called Beatles Rewind. The ebook is completely free, so you can download and read it immediately on your computer, your phone, or your tablet. Just go to Amazon.com and search for Beatles Rewind, and you can also get it in paperback. The paperback is kind of expensive.
But it's worth every penny.
So, with that out of the way, I want you to just imagine the scene, right? It's September 8th, 1969.
Right.
The four most famous musicians on the planet are gathered at their Savile Row offices in London, and they've just finished recording their masterpiece, Abbey Road.
Which is an incredible achievement.
Exactly. So the logical next step would be to, celebrate, maybe talk about a tour. But instead, John Lennon just drops this absolute bombshell. He looks around the room and essentially asks for a divorce.
Yeah, he wanted out. And he wasn't just casually suggesting, like, doing a solo record on the side. He was proposing this radical restructuring of the whole group's dynamic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he demanded this equal rights system, a completely new hierarchy that would just totally strip Paul McCartney of his de facto leadership role.
So he was basically trying to blow up the entire foundation of the band?
Exactly. John's proposal was specifically designed to give George Harrison an equal share of the songwriting space. But when you look at the psychology of that meeting, John was making demands that were so disruptive, they sound like ultimatums from someone who has already mentally checked out.
Right, like he hadn't figured out how to physically leave the room yet.
Bingo.
And part of that mental checkout was John Lennon just completely dismissing half of the album they literally just finished creating.
Oh, yeah. He rejected the famous Side 2 medley entirely, just called it junk.
Right. He referred to Paul McCartney's compositions as granny music, which is just, ouch.
It's brutal. John demanded that his own songs be grouped together on one side of the vinyl, just completely quarantined from Paul's influence.
So that creative clash over side 2 is kind of the key to understanding how they were operating in those final days, right?
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Because Paul McCartney is still operating under this Sgt. Pepper mentality.
Ah, okay. The grand vision.
Right. He envisions this continuous, sprawling, symphonic suite.
Thing.
Exactly. Half-finished ideas, these little musical vignettes that honestly just couldn't support a traditional 3-minute track structure.
Wait, so isn't the medley basically a metaphor for the band at that point?
No.
Like just tape holding together pieces that don't naturally fit anymore?
I love that analogy.
Yes.
Paul was treating that medley like a cinematic montage. Think about a director who knows the actors in a scene absolutely despise each other.
Right, so you just keep the camera moving fast enough.
Exactly. Jumping rapidly from fragment to fragment so you build this grand illusion and the audience won't notice the underlying tension. He was trying to stitch these incomplete scraps together using studio tape and sheer willpower, just pretending the foundation wasn't cracking.
But John Lennon saw right through that, didn't he?
Oh, completely. Because by mid-1969, John is heavily immersed in his Plastic Ono phase.
Right.
So he isn't interested in illusions or montages. He wants raw, unvarnished, brutal honesty. He views Paul's Baroque arrangements and all those clever tape edits as a cop-out, a way to disguise weak songwriting.
So John just wants these blunt, forceful statements. And I guess the perfect example is his track, I Want You. She's so heavy.
Oh, yes. That track is wild.
It's like 8 minutes of this primal, repetitive heaviness. It builds this massive wall of sound, introduces swirling white noise, and then right at the peak of the crescendo, it just abruptly stops.
No fade out at all.
Exactly. The tape was literally severed with scissors. When you hear it, it just halts the entire momentum. It's shocking. But that jarring, unapologetic vibe is exactly what John Lennon was chasing.
Yeah, and while John and Paul are locked in this massive ideological tug of war over whether to, weave fragments together or let raw tracks stand alone, George Harrison quietly enters the conversation and just casually delivers the 2 best songs on the entire album.
Oh, something, and here comes the sun.
Right. I mean, Frank Sinatra famously called something the greatest love song ever written.
Which is just an incredible endorsement. But I find Paul McCartney's reaction to George's emergence so fascinating. Because during the sessions, Paul gives George this remarkably backhanded compliment.
Oh, yeah. He openly admits that George's songs, quote, weren't that good up until this point.
I mean, it takes a staggering amount of ego to watch your bandmate bring in an absolute masterpiece and respond by basically saying, well, you finally wrote a good one.
Yeah, and that comment, perfectly encapsulates why George Harrison was so frustrated.
Yep.
He had been delivering incredible material for years, but he was constantly relegated to this secondary tier.
Right.
And you have to consider the context of George's life at that exact moment. He was finding immense personal and creative confidence by hanging out with guitarists like Eric Clapton.
Oh, so he's out there being validated by other legends.
Exactly.
Yeah.
George was experiencing what it felt like to be treated as an equal by musical heavyweights. So coming back to the studio and being treated like a junior employee by John Lennon and Paul McCartney while they bicker over sequencing, he was just completely over it.
Well, speaking of sequencing, let's focus on that medley they were arguing over. Because the way it was finalized involves a studio mistake that is just, it's practically unbelievable. What happened with the original trial edit?
So the initial cut of the medley was known as the long one. It ran for about 15 minutes, but there was this glaring 20-second flaw right in the middle of the sequence.
Oh, Her Majesty.
Right. Paul McCartney had originally positioned that very short acoustic track right between Mean Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam.
Which makes zero sense musically. The key of the song clashes, the tempo drops out of nowhere, and it completely derails the driving rock transition that Mean Mr. Mustard sets up.
Exactly. So Paul realizes this, and his solution is to tell the engineers to literally cut that 20-second physical piece of magnetic tape out and throw it in the trash.
Wait, so a junior guy disobeys a direct order from a Beatle because of an Abbey Road never erase anything rule, tacks it onto the end of the reel, and that's how we get the famous hidden track.
That is exactly how we get it. He was giving that order to a junior engineer named John Kurlander. And at Abbey Road Studios, there was a strict ironclad policy. You never throw away a recording.
Never erase anything.
Right. So John Kurlander was terrified of throwing away a piece of music created by Paul McCartney. He deliberately disobeyed the instruction. Instead of throwing it away, he spliced that 20-second clip of Her Majesty onto the very end of the master reel.
With a bunch of blank tape between it?
Yeah, followed by about 20 seconds of blank red leader tape, simply to store it safely.
I just love the engineering irony here. They're in one of the most sophisticated, high-pressure recording environments in the world, and we get the most famous hidden track in music history simply because an assistant was too scared to break a studio rule.
And then they completely forget the track is sitting at the end of the reel.
Right. So when the next engineer plays the full mix back for the band, the sweeping final chord of the song, The End, rings out. Then there are 20 seconds of dead silence. Then suddenly, Her Majesty pops up.
Yes. And if you listen closely, the song starts with a loud crashing chord. That isn't actually part of Her Majesty.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah. That is the severed final chord of Mean Mr. Mustard left over from when the tape was physically cut with a razor blade.
That's wild. And Paul McCartney hears this playback, absolutely loves the chaotic, accidental surprise of it, and decides to keep it exactly as it is.
It proves that sometimes the most brilliant creative decisions are just total accidents.
They really are. But just before that hidden track, the medley closes with The End. And knowing the context of their animosity, listening to the instrumental section of The End just gives you chills.
Oh, completely.
Because John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison plug in and trade two-bar guitar solos live in a single take.
And you know, the structure of a two-bar solo is so unforgiving. You have this incredibly brief window to make a musical statement before you have to pass the baton to the next person.
Right, you can't be selfish with it.
Exactly. For that sequence to work, they had to listen to each other perfectly. For one brief, shining moment on the studio floor, the egos vanished. You hear three distinct guitar voices. Paul's melodic style, George's soaring, articulate bends, and John's heavy, rhythmic distortion.
And they aren't stepping on each other's toes at all.
Not at all.
The symbolism is just so heavy there. They literally could not sit in the boardroom and speak to each other without fighting. But you put guitars in their hands, and they spontaneously achieve the exact musical democracy John Lennon had been demanding all year.
Words failed them, so they communicated through the instruments.
And that allows Paul McCartney to close the medley with that famous Shakespearean couplet. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Even John Lennon, the same man who had spent months disparaging Paul's lyrical efforts, conceded that the line was a brilliant piece of poetry. The musical fault line held together just long enough to record that finale.
But it was temporary.
Very. 6 days before Abbey Road was released, John officially declared his intention to leave.
Yeah. But that desperation John felt in September, wanting out, wanting to strip away the studio tricks and just play raw music, that didn't happen overnight.
Oh, definitely not.
To understand how they reached that breaking point, we need to trace the timeline backward. It was the direct fallout from an experiment they tried 9 months earlier, in January 1969.
The sessions that were originally intended to be called Get Back, but eventually became the album Let It Be.
Right. And the gap between their original ambitions for those January sessions and the bleak reality of what actually transpired is just staggering.
It really is wild. The core concept was to strip away the complex studio overdubs and prove they were still a functioning live rack band.
They wanted to culminate the rehearsals with a massive, triumphant live performance.
Yes, and their logistical ideas were just entirely detached from reality.
Totally. They were brainstorming, playing live at the Great Sphinx in Egypt at sunrise. They discussed renting a Roman amphitheater in Tunisia.
They seriously debated loading the band onto an ocean liner in the middle of the Atlantic, or setting up a stage in the Sahara Desert.
And they were genuinely looking at budgets and logistics for these things.
You have to look at why they were generating those absurd cinematic ideas. It was escapism. They were trying to manufacture magic using exotic locations because the internal magic in the rehearsal room was completely gone.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
The actual sessions were miserable. Every argument, every uncomfortable silence, every flub note was being recorded by documentary cameras. Everyone was exhausted.
Didn't George Harrison actually walk out?
He did. He felt so dismissed that he quit the band for 5 days. John Lennon was completely emotionally withdrawn, and through all of this, Ringo Starr was sitting behind his kit, trying to be the peacemaker, just dutifully drumming his way through overwhelming dysfunction.
Which leads to my absolute favorite moment of pragmatic problem solving. They are arguing in circles about international travel permits, cargo transport for heavy equipment, unpredictable weather in Africa.
Right.
And amidst all this chaotic brainstorming, Ringo Starr just deadpans, "I'd like to go on the roof." I mean, I want you to consider how often we overcomplicate our own lives, right? We build these elaborate, impossible plans to avoid dealing with the reality in front of us when the most brilliant history-making solution is literally just walking up a flight of stairs.
The genius of the roof idea was its immediate simplicity. You do not need international permits. You do not need a fleet of cargo planes. You just walk upstairs and plug in.
So on January 30, 1969, they did exactly that. They climbed to the top of their Savile Row headquarters in London.
But we need to properly set the scene for that performance because the conditions were brutal.
Oh, absolutely. It's a bitter 45 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 7 degrees Celsius. There is this damp, biting wind whipping straight off the River Thames.
And you have freezing roadies physically hauling heavy Fender amplifiers, a full drum kit, and a bass guitar up a very narrow, steep staircase.
With no real sound check.
None. And the band members were absolutely not dressed for an outdoor concert in the middle of a London winter. Their wardrobe choices became instantly iconic, but they were entirely dictated by cold weather survival, not fashion.
Right, like John Lennon is playing guitar wrapped in Yoko Ono's luxurious fur coat.
Exactly. And Ringo Starr is sitting at the drum kit wearing his wife Maureen's bright red raincoat, simply to block the freezing wind.
George Harrison looks like a Victorian gentleman wearing a heavy black fur coat paired with bright green pants.
And then there's Paul McCartney, who's wearing a standard suit jacket and somehow looks completely unbothered by the freezing temperature.
Which is just classic Paul. But that physical environment created a nightmare for the recording engineers down in the basement.
Oh, definitely.
That damp wind we mentioned was gusting across the open rooftop and slamming into the studio microphones. And when wind hits a microphone diaphragm, it creates massive plosive bursts of air, these loud, low-frequency rumbles that cause total audio distortion.
It just destroys the recording.
Right. So the technical solution they came up with is legendary. The engineers send Mal Evans, their trusted roadie, sprinting down the stairs.
He runs down to a local shop on Regent Street right in the middle of the busy lunch hour, and he buys packets of women's pantyhose.
He runs back up to the roof, completely out of breath, and stretches the nylon stockings over the microphones.
Which is incredible. The most famous band in the world is using improvised hosiery to save their recording.
And the physics behind it makes perfect sense. The tight nylon mesh breaks up the physical gusts of wind into smaller, harmless streams of air, preventing them from punching the microphone diaphragm. But the high-frequency audio waves of the vocals and guitars pass right through without being muffled.
It solved the wind problem perfectly. But the cold was still wreaking havoc on everything else. The low temperatures caused the wood of the guitars to contract, meaning the strings refused to stay in tune.
Oof, yeah.
Ringo Starr's fingers were numb, making it incredibly difficult to grip the drumsticks. John Lennon's vocals had this sharp, aggressive edge that you only get from trying to sing with freezing air in your lungs.
But, all of that physical struggle stripped away the studio polish. It resulted in this undeniably raw, authentic rock performance.
It did. And there was one other crucial factor on that roof. Someone who wasn't an official member of the group, but whose presence altered the entire psychology of the band.
Keyboardist Billy Preston.
Yes. Bringing Billy Preston into those sessions was a masterstroke. From a musical standpoint, he injected this rich, vibrant soul and gospel flavor into the tracks. His keyboard work elevated the groove immensely.
But on a purely psychological level, his presence as an outsider forced the band to be on their best behavior.
Exactly. It is the classic house guest effect. If you are arguing with your family in the living room and a guest walks through the front door, you immediately quiet down and act polite.
Right. You do not bicker in front of an external peer whom you respect.
Precisely because he was there, they stopped arguing and locked into the music. They powered through Get Back, Don't Let Me Down, I've Got a Feeling, One After 909, and Dig a Pony.
It was fundamental driving rock and roll. And if you watch the footage of that performance, the internal resentment temporarily evaporates.
It really does.
John Lennon and Paul McCartney are looking at each other, leaning into the same vocal microphone and smiling. They tap back into the exact same energy they had playing sweaty basement clubs in their early days.
Meanwhile, 5 stories below them, the city of London is completely grinding to a halt.
Oh, the street scene.
Yeah. Savile Row was a district built for quiet, bespoke tailors and horse-drawn carriages. Suddenly, the massive sound of amplified guitars and a pounding bass guitar is echoing off the brick buildings.
Office workers are hanging out of their windows. Secretaries are abandoning their typewriters. Shoppers are frozen on the sidewalks.
Everyone is just craning their necks upward, realizing that the biggest band in the world is throwing a free concert in the sky.
But of course, an echoing rock concert in the middle of a prestigious business district on a Thursday afternoon inevitably brings consequences.
Right. The Metropolitan Police arrive at the building, responding to multiple angry noise complaints from nearby businesses. They're dealing with massive crowds blocking the streets.
I mean, just imagine being the cop who threatens to arrest the Beatles for playing too loud. That is the ultimate pub story.
Oh, totally. And Paul McCartney sees the police officers step onto the roof, and because he possesses this relentless showman instinct, he leans right into the chaos.
He starts mocking them, right?
Yeah. While they're playing Get Back, he intentionally starts ad-libbing the lyrics, singing about getting arrested for playing on the roof. He is openly mocking the absurdity of the police trying to shut down a Beatles performance over a noise complaint on their own property.
It's just brilliant. The police eventually demand the amplifiers be disconnected, effectively pulling the plug at the 42-minute mark. And as the show officially ends, John Lennon steps up to the microphone for his legendary self-deprecating sign-off.
He looks out and says, "I'd like to say thank you on behalf of the group and ourselves, and I hope we pass the audition."
After conquering the entire globe, after fundamentally changing popular music, he ends their final live performance ever with a joke about hoping they were good enough to get the gig.
It's so perfect.
Looking at this entire 1969 timeline, the legacy of that year is a massive paradox. You have a group disintegrating in slow motion. The personal relationships are in ruins, yet they are completely capable of climbing onto a freezing rooftop and delivering a blistering live set, and then walking into Abbey Road Studios to piece together their most cohesive masterpiece. The personal dysfunction never managed to corrupt the musical output.
It proves that their musical chemistry was entirely separate from their interpersonal chemistry. Even when they couldn't stand each other as people, they remained unparalleled as a musical unit. They knew exactly how to support each other sonically, even when they couldn't support each other emotionally. So picture this. It's November 1968. You have just walked out of the record store with the brand new album for the biggest band on the planet.
Right.
You get home, you sit down, and you look at this cover, and it's just, well, it's completely blank. Just this minimalist white square.
A huge departure right there.
Exactly. So you open up the gatefold sleeve, that massive cardboard format that, opens up like a book. You're expecting to see the band smiling back at you, but instead, 4 loose, glossy color photographs just spill right out into your lap.
And that moment right there, that's our entire focus today. We're looking at how photographer John Kelly's stark, individual portraits of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr completely revolutionized album packaging. Yeah.
But even more than that, how these photos served as this raw, documentary-style confession to the world that this massive, untouchable band was fundamentally fracturing.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because, I mean, did fans actually look at 4 loose photos dropping out of a sleeve and instantly think, oh, the band is over?
Well,
because today, like, a band putting out solo portraits is just standard marketing, right? Did anyone in 1968 actually see a bit of stubble on Paul McCartney and think the sky was falling?
you have to put yourself in the shoes of a fan in that specific era. Up until this exact moment, the public had always been presented with this completely aggressively unified aesthetic.
Oh, sure. Matching suits and everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Go back to 1964, you have those matching suits, the identical mop-top haircuts, always. And even just a year prior to the White Album, you had the elaborate, wildly colorful matching military band costumes of Sgt. Pepper.
So they were always a single entity, completely. And suddenly, with these 4 loose photographs, there is no Fab Four mythology anymore. There's just no collective identity.
So it wasn't just a stylistic pivot.
Yeah.
It was basically the destruction of a brand they had spent half a decade building.
That's spot on. And that visual shock was a highly deliberate choice conceptualized by Richard Hamilton.
He was the pop artist, right?
Yeah, a pioneering pop artist. Paul McCartney commissioned him to design the packaging, and Hamilton recognized a fundamental truth about the music that was actually pressed onto the vinyl inside that white sleeve.
Which was what?
That the music wasn't a collaborative effort anymore.
Meaning they weren't sitting in a circle, like, hashing out these songs together.
Far from it. The members of the band were essentially acting as session players for 3 completely distinct songwriters.
Oh, just clocking in.
Right. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison were bringing in their own, fully formed tracks, and they were merely using the others as backing musicians to get the specific tracks laid down on tape.
So Hamilton realized the packaging needed to reflect that disjointed reality.
Exactly.
It's like getting a puzzle, but instead of interlocking pieces that form one big picture, you just get 4 separate, complete paintings. And you're basically told to figure out how they belong on the same wall.
That is a perfect way to describe it.
They still share the same band name, but they aren't fighting the creative battles together anymore. They're just on their own separate missions. So how did that visual fragmentation change the way fans actually sat in their living rooms and consumed the album?
It individualized the entire listening experience. Because the packaging focused on the members as isolated individuals rather than a group, fans were given permission to interact with the band differently.
I see.
Instead of taking in a unified artistic statement, you're holding these distinct, separate portraits while listening to an album that jumps wildly from one solo vision to the next.
Yeah, the packaging was telling the listener that they were dealing with 4 independent adults moving in totally opposite directions. And the way those portraits were captured physically translates that isolation.
Yeah.
The photographer, John Kelly, shot these in the autumn of 1968, right?
He did, yes.
And he deliberately suggested straight, simple, individual shots for the inside of that stark white cover.
Yeah, Kelly's approach was intentionally stripped down. 3 of the 4 portraits were shot right at Apple headquarters, and Kelly made a point of using no incredible lighting or special effects.
Let's talk about what no incredible lighting actually means in practice, because that completely changes the texture of a photograph.
It changes everything.
When you remove studio lighting, you lose the soft, flattering glow. You get harsh shadows, you see the pores on their skin, you see the exhaustion. It creates this unvarnished documentary style.
Right, and contrast that with the psychedelic swirl of Magical Mystery Tour just a short time before this.
Oh yeah, the visual language there was all about fantasy and elaborate staging. Kelly basically stripped all the magic away to create something almost anti-glamorous.
He demolished the parent-friendly, sanitized image that their manager, Brian Epstein, had spent years cultivating.
Completely.
The destruction of that clean-cut image is absolute when you look closely at the specific details. Take Paul McCartney's portrait, for example. He showed up looking entirely unshaven.
Which, seems minor now. But at the time, that was a massive statement.
Oh, huge.
There was actually some intense behind-the-scenes drama over that stubble. John Kelly and Paul McCartney had words over whether he should shave for the shoot.
Really? I didn't realize they actually argued about it.
Oh, yeah. It resulted in several failed attempts to get the right shot. They ultimately had to photograph Paul McCartney at his own home on Cavendish Avenue just to get the final image.
Wow.
So the stubble was this very loud visual declaration that the polite entertainer era was dead.
And you can contrast that forced casualness with John Lennon's portrait.
Yeah.
He's wearing his round granny glasses, but it's his posture and his eyes that are so striking.
He looks so distant.
Incredibly withdrawn and contemplative. He doesn't look like a pop star engaging with the camera or the audience. He looks like someone retreating entirely into his own mind.
And then you have George Harrison, sporting very long hair and a prominent mustache, looking every inch the post-India spiritual seeker.
Right. He has entirely left the pop star era behind.
He's fully adopted the visual identity of the late 60s counterculture. I mean, he looks like a completely different person than the guy in the matching suit from 1964.
He does. And then Ringo Starr manages to look approachable in his portrait, which aligns with his historical public persona.
Right.
But there is a distinct, undeniable weariness in his eyes.
Yeah, you can really see it.
When you synthesize all four of these images, what becomes overwhelmingly clear is that these are not teeny bopper publicity shots.
No, not at all.
These are portraits of four adult men nearing 30 years old who had just endured massive collective trauma.
I'm glad you brought up the trauma.
Yeah.
Because the sheer weight of what they had just gone through is stamped right on their faces. It wasn't just creative differences, was it?
No, it was foundational loss. You have the sudden death of Brian Eckstein the year prior, which left them completely rudderless on a managerial level.
Just totally lost.
Then you add the immense crushing business pressures of launching Apple Corps. That was their own chaotic company that was draining them financially and emotionally.
It was a disaster.
And on top of that, you have the highly complex, spiritually exhausting trip to India. All of that heavy life experience is printed right there on the photographic paper.
So they looked exhausted and isolated in the photographs. And based on what was happening at Abbey Road that autumn, they practically lived in that isolation.
They really did.
The studio reality behind the stubble and the weariness was even more intense than the photos let on.
The visual isolation perfectly mirrored the eclectic, chaotic track list of the album itself. You're jumping relentlessly from delicate acoustic ballads to avant-garde tape collages to heavy, blistering rock.
But they were still in the same building, right? Even if they were acting as session musicians for each other, how bad did the atmosphere actually get behind closed doors?
The tension had reached an absolute breaking point. Yoko Ono was now a constant presence in the studio with John Lennon.
Oh, wow. And that broke a huge rule, Ray.
It completely broke the band's long-standing golden rule about not having wives or girlfriends present during recording sessions. Her presence instantly altered the fundamental chemistry and the safety of that room.
Because suddenly there's an outsider sitting in the inner sanctum observing everything. And the sacred dynamic of those four guys in a room is totally shattered.
Exactly. And meanwhile, George Harrison is going through this massive creative renaissance. He's bringing in absolute masterpieces.
Just incredible songs.
Yet he was incredibly frustrated because he was still being treated like a junior partner by the others.
It had to hurt.
He was struggling to get the same studio focus and respect that John Lennon and Paul McCartney demanded for their own work.
And at the same time, Paul McCartney is desperately trying to play the role of the producer and the director, just trying to hold the entire project together.
But in doing so, he was increasingly seen as domineering and controlling by the rest of the room. He was trying to steer a ship where all the other occupants actively wanted to jump overboard.
What about John Lennon? If Paul McCartney is trying to steer the ship, what is John Lennon doing during these sessions?
John Lennon was spiraling into heroin use at this time.
Jeez.
That emotional distance you see in his photograph, staring blankly through those round granny glasses, was very much a reality of his daily state in the studio. He was heavily insulated from the rest of the room.
The friction sounds entirely unsustainable. I don't know how they got anything recorded.
It was so severe that Ringo Starr actually quit the band in August. He just walked out and left.
Wait, if Ringo Starr quit in August, but the recording process had to continue, who's playing on the tracks from that period?
That led directly to Paul McCartney playing drums on the tracks, Back in the USSR and Dear Prudence.
You're kidding.
No, he physically stepped into the role. The breakdown of the group was so literal that they were recording major iconic tracks without their complete lineup.
Which fundamentally changes the groove of the music. Paul McCartney playing drums has a stiffer, more driving feel compared to Ringo Starr's natural laid-back swing.
It absolutely changes the sound.
The internal fracturing literally changed the physical sound of the record.
Yeah.
What fascinates me is the eerie prescience of John Kelly's photos when you know all of that context.
How so?
Well, when you look at those glossy inserts, they aren't dramatic, they aren't angry, nobody is glaring at the camera or smashing a guitar, they just show four men alone with their thoughts.
Right.
But looking back with the benefit of history, they look exactly like promotional photos for four solo careers that were still 2 full years away from officially starting. They were broadcasting the future directly into the fans' hands.
That tactile element, the fact that fans were holding these loose photographs in their hands while listening to this fractured music, was a major innovation in album packaging.
That's totally new.
If we look at the historical context of vinyl records, we have to ask, were the White Album inserts the very first of their kind? The history of record packaging is pretty complex.
See, I always assumed they had already pioneered elaborate packaging with Sgt. Pepper the year before.
They did push boundaries there, yes.
They included the cardboard cutouts, the printed lyrics on the back, the colorful inner sleeve. Didn't that already change the game?
It did, but those Sgt. Pepper inserts were fundamentally novelty items. They were cutouts of mustaches, Sergeant Stripes, and little stand-up figures.
Oh, right.
You played with them, maybe stuck a paper mustache to your face for a laugh. And if you look further back into the 1950s and early 1960s, many jazz albums often had bound photo booklets or gatefold sleeves featuring multiple photographs.
But the key word there is bound. They were physically attached to the packaging. You flip through them like pages in a book.
Precisely. The White Album's 4 glossy photographs served a completely different purpose. They were not attached to anything. They were art objects in their own right.
The physical quality of these inserts was exceptional for a mass-produced pop album. Let's talk about the actual manufacturing for a second.
Okay.
These were 7 3/4 by 10 3/4 inch glossy prints. They were manufactured on high-quality photographic paper.
Not just cheap flyers.
Exactly. If you look closely at the American pressings, they're clearly marked, printed in the USA, in the corner. They weren't just throwaway promotional items printed on cheap matte paper. They were intended to be framed.
Right, or tacked directly onto a bedroom wall.
They were premium items that felt substantial in your hands.
By providing these loose, high-quality inserts, the album package effectively turned the fans into curators.
Oh, I like that word. Curators.
It's a brilliant psychological shift orchestrated by the art design. Fans were no longer just passive consumers of a singular curated image. They were given the tools to design their own visual experience of the band.
That makes total sense.
A fan could take all 4 photographs and display them together on their bedroom wall to manually recreate the group.
Or, if they were feeling the fracture themselves, they could separate them. A fan could file 3 of the photos away in a drawer and just display their favorite member on the wall.
Exactly. The photographs worked beautifully together as a complete set, but they worked just as well completely apart.
Which is the most perfect metaphor for the band at that exact moment in 1968.
It truly is.
They were barely functioning as a collective group, but they were operating at an incredibly high, masterful level as individuals. The packaging essentially handed that reality directly to the listener and said, you decide how to put them together because we can't figure it out anymore.
The lasting legacy of this specific design choice is massive. It fundamentally altered what artists realized they could do with a standard vinyl record.
How so? Like, who else did this?
Well, you see the direct influence in subsequent legendary albums across the next decade. The Rolling Stones later included a series of 12 perforated postcards as inserts for their album Exile on Mainsail.
Oh, yeah, the postcard.
And the band included a massive fold-out poster insert featuring a photograph by Norman Seeff for their album Stage Fright. The concept of including loose, collectible photographic art became an absolute staple of premium rock albums.
But because they were loose inserts, it created a massive unintended consequence for modern record collectors today.
Oh, for sure.
Loose photos are incredibly easy to lose. They get bent, they get damaged, they get accidentally separated from the album sleeve over decades of people moving houses and passing records down.
Finding a vintage, original first pressing of the White Album with all 4 individual photographs still perfectly intact, unbent, and in pristine condition has become increasingly difficult.
It's a collector's nightmare, honestly. Those complete sets command premium, highly valuable prices on the market today precisely because the packaging was so interactive.
Yep.
The very thing that made it cool in 1968 makes it incredibly rare now.
When we step back and look at the entire narrative thread of the White Album's design, there's a deep, profound poignancy to what Richard Hamilton and John Kelly achieved.
There really is a sadness to it.
Think about the physical act of buying that record. Even in their studied separation, even with all the studio tension and the fractured music, the 4 photographs still arrived as a set.
Right.
You open the album and they were all there together. They were broken, absolutely. But they were not yet broken up.
Yeah.
They were united only by that minimal, stark white sleeve that temporarily held them together, acknowledging the harsh reality over a pleasant fiction.
That is such a powerful way to look at it. So if album packaging can be a secret visual confession of a band's internal chemistry, take a look at the artwork of your favorite albums. Do those covers hide the truth? Or if you look closely enough, do they secretly tell you everything you need to know about the state of the musicians before you even drop the needle?
Chapter 11, then.
Let's jump straight into 1968. You really need to picture this scene vividly because it completely shatters the whole polished myth of music history you might be used to.
Okay, set the scene for us.
You are standing inside Kenwood, which is John Lennon's sprawling Tudor-style home on the St. George's Hill estate in Weybridge, Surrey. And you're catching him in this incredibly turbulent, chaotic moment.
Right, his life is just turning upside down at this point.
Exactly. His marriage is falling apart, his entire worldview is fundamentally shifting, and he is methodically tearing down his past, literally tearing it down. He walks right into his sunroom, grabs a framed painting off the wall, and just starts violently ripping the paper to shreds.
Wow. And you know what makes this scene so heavy is that you aren't just watching him destroy some random piece of expensive decor. You are watching the destruction of a deeply personal, irreplaceable artifact.
Yeah, this wasn't just any painting.
Right. It was a watercolor and ink portrait of John himself. It was painted back in Hamburg around 1961 or 1962. And the artist, it was his late best friend, Stuart Sutcliffe.
Which just adds massive emotional weight to the whole moment.
Yeah.
I mean, Stuart Sutcliffe was the friend John met back at the Liverpool College of Art in 1957.
Their dynamic was incredibly strong.
Oh, totally. It was so strong that Stuart actually sold one of his own paintings just to buy a guitar, specifically so he could join the band. And the irony there is Stuart Sutcliffe couldn't really play the bass.
Yeah, he was an artist, not a musician.
Exactly. But John demanded he be in the band anyway. He just wanted his artistic energy in the room. Stuart eventually left the group to focus entirely on studying painting in Hamburg under the pop artist Edoardo Paolozzi.
And then, tragically, he died of a brain hemorrhage at just 21 years old.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. So when you look at John Lennon in 1968, physically tearing up this rare, intimate portrait, painted by a ghost he never quite got over, you are looking at a man at war with his own history.
And that specific tension right there between the pristine, heavily manicured idea of a band's legacy and the chaotic, messy, highly tangible reality behind the scenes, that is exactly our mission today.
Because if you look closely at the underlying mechanics of this history, it's the flaws, the accidents, and the physical artifacts surviving the chaos that actually give the music you love its heartbeat.
I mean, the survival mechanism of this exact torn portrait is the perfect place to start. Because John didn't just throw the pieces in the fire.
No, he didn't.
Right, a man named Bernard Clark, who ran a local photo studio, happened to be standing in the Kenwood house that exact day delivering camera gear. He watched John tear the painting, waited for a beat, and simply asked, "Can I have it?"
Just like that.
Yeah. And John he handed the torn shreds over without a second thought.
That's wild. So Clark took those pieces home and painstakingly taped them back together. But the painting didn't become some prized mantelpiece right away.
No, it was actually banished to an attic for decades.
Right, because Clark's wife was very close friends with Cynthia Lennon, John's first wife. And she absolutely refused to have a visual reminder of that painful, chaotic divorce era hanging on her wall.
Which means it just sat in a dark box until 2024 when Bernard's son finally pulled it out. And this triggers a fascinating moment of modern art forensics.
Yeah, how do you prove that a taped-together piece of paper in an attic is the exact same painting that hung in John Lennon's house?
Well, John Silk at Eubanks Auctions found a vintage photograph from 1967. It shows John sitting in that exact sunroom during the Sgt. Pepper era, and over his shoulder, hanging on the wall, is a painting.
But the vintage photograph is taken at a sharp angle, right? You can't just overlay the two images and call it a day.
Exactly. So Silk takes the high-resolution scan of the torn auction painting and parallelogram pontizes it.
Okay, wait, stop right there, because the geometry of this is wild. Parallelogramtizing.
Yeah. When you parallelogramtize an image, you're basically performing homography. The software identifies the four corners of the painting in the angled 1967 photograph.
Uh-huh.
It calculates the perspective distortion and then mathematically stretches the flat digital scan of the physical painting to match that exact skewed perspective.
Wow. So it is like taking a square piece of rubber and pulling the corners until it perfectly matches the shape of a diamond on a screen.
Precisely. And once they mathematically warped the digital scan to match the 1967 perspective, they overlaid it onto the vintage photo.
And it was a match.
A perfect match. The brush strokes, the ink bleeds, and the specific grain of the paper aligned down to the millimeter. It proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that this rescued, damaged piece of paper was the silent witness to John's most creative period.
That is incredible. And didn't the auction house cautiously estimate it might sell for like 3,000 to 5,000 pounds?
Yeah, but it actually hammered down at 19,500 pounds. That is almost 26,000 US dollars.
You know, that staggering price tag makes total sense when you realize how desperate people are to physically hold on to history right now. We're witnessing this exact same behavioral phenomenon with the modern vinyl revolution.
Oh, absolutely.
You live in an era where you can just shout across the room at a smart speaker and a weightless, invisible digital file plays instantly. Yet, we are seeing a massive, aggressive resurgence in physical media.
And you have to acknowledge that this specific band is single-handedly anchoring the physical catalog industry. Right now, Abbey Road moves over 200,000 new vinyl units every single year.
A 50-year-old album is routinely outperforming brand new modern pop hits on the vinyl charts. That's just insane.
It is. You have fans eagerly dropping $84 for the Abbey Road Anniversary box set or handing over $300 for the anthology vinyl set.
But why? I mean, it's not just blind nostalgia. It is about the physical mechanism of the experience. It is the ritual of sliding that heavy 12-inch disc out of a static-free sleeve.
Yeah, the tactile nature of it.
Exactly. Running your fingers over the embossed, raised lettering on the cover of the white album, or interacting with the physical cutout mustaches stuffed inside the Sgt. Pepper sleeve. You simply cannot extract that tactile relationship from a 50-pixel thumbnail glowing on your phone screen.
Plus, buying the physical media unlocks these incredibly intense sonic debates, specifically the war between mono and stereo.
Oh man, the mechanics of that debate are endlessly fascinating. Throughout the 1960s, mono was not just the default, it was the definitive intended format.
Right, mono delivers this massive, unified punch of sound straight to your chest.
Exactly. For example, She's Leaving Home was mixed significantly faster and at a higher pitch in mono, which was exactly how the band wanted it to sound: tighter, younger, more urgent.
And Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds utilizes a specific, heavily manipulated vocal phasing in mono that creates a thick, trippy atmosphere.
Yeah, and when you switch to the stereo mix, that atmospheric phasing is just gone. It disappears.
I always like to explain it by thinking about a perfectly blended soup.
A soup. Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah, so when a master chef makes a great soup, every single flavor, the salt, the broth, the vegetables, hits your palate at the exact same millisecond, creating one cohesive, powerful physical reaction. That is a mono mix. It is unified.
Okay, I like that.
But early stereo is like a chef taking all the ingredients of that soup and separating them into different corners of a wide plate.
That analogy actually explains the technical limitations of the time perfectly. Because early stereo mixing consoles didn't have the nuanced panning dials we have today. Engineers often only had a crude three-way switch: hard left, center, or hard right.
Wow, just those three options.
Right. And because stereo was treated as a novelty gimmick for audiophiles, engineers would aggressively hard pan the audio. They would dump all the vocals entirely into the right speaker and shove all the backing instruments entirely into the left speaker.
Which creates a bizarre physiological reaction when you listen on modern headphones. Your brain naturally expects low-end frequencies, like a bass guitar or a kick drum, to be centered in your head.
Yeah, it throws everything off.
Exactly. When an engineer shoves all the bass into your left ear, it creates this jarring, hollowed-out, almost unbalanced sensation. Sure, it is intellectually interesting to separate the ingredients on the plate and study the individual parts, but that is not how the meal was ever meant to be consumed.
Exactly why modern producers are increasingly returning to analog tape and embracing the imperfections. The legendary film composer Hans Zimmer recently discussed this.
Oh, what did he say?
He pointed out that music retains its humanity precisely because of its structural flaws. Recording to physical tape forces a musician to commit to a performance in real time, complete with the subtle timing glitches and pitch variation.
Right, there's no autocorrect.
Exactly. And that concept, committing to the performance no matter what goes wrong, is the actual unpolished genius of how this band operated live. Their greatest strength was conquering technical chaos in real time.
To see that in action, you have to travel back to December 17th, 1962. We are inside the Granada TV studios in Manchester. The band is performing on a television show called People and Places.
Okay.
And they are playing their new single, Please Please Me. Now, you have to remember the stakes here. This is early live television. There are no safety nets, no digital edits, no rewinds, no second takes.
Pure pressure.
Absolutely. So as soon as the red light goes on, the audio mix completely fails. The harmonica microphone, which is the instrument carrying the entire melodic hook of the song, becomes a total ghost in the machine.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the engineer either kills the channel completely, or it is mixed so low you cannot hear it over the amplified guitars.
For a band that relied heavily on intricate, tight vocal interplay, losing a main microphone on live television should have been a train wreck, but their resilience was absolute.
They just powered through it.
Well, earlier in the broadcast, John Lennon had actually been bantering with the television host, jokingly complaining that the studio wires had a mind of their own. So when the mix catastrophically failed, they didn't freeze.
That's so smart.
Yeah. Afterwards, George Harrison smoothly stepped up and deflected the blame, joking to the audience that the band was perfectly in tune and it was entirely the fault of the rogue wires.
But the real magic is how they survived the actual 3 minutes of the song. When the audio drops out in a television studio, you lose your room monitors. You are suddenly playing in a vacuum.
That sounds like a nightmare for a musician.
It is. Ringo Starr immediately recognized the danger and became a human metronome. He locked down the tempo so aggressively that the rest of the band could use his visual cues to stay together.
Wow.
Meanwhile, Paul McCartney had to sing his harmonies completely blind.
Singing blind in a live television studio is physically exhausting. Without hearing his own voice bouncing back through a monitor, Paul McCartney had to rely entirely on muscle memory and the physical resonance in his own chest to ensure he was hitting the correct pitch against John Lennon's vocal.
Which he also couldn't hear clearly.
Exactly. They showed that exact same bulletproof mentality during their legendary Ed Sullivan Show debut in 1964. You have 73 million people watching live in their living rooms, and the audio engineer mixes Paul McCartney's microphone way too low during the opening song.
But they didn't stop playing. They just dynamically adjusted their stage volume on the fly.
Total pros.
It reminds me of Adele at the 2016 Grammys. Do you remember when her piano microphone physically detached, dropped directly onto the exposed piano strings, and created this horrendous metallic clattering noise during a ballad?
Oh yeah, that was brutal.
But she didn't even flinch. The core rule of live performance is that you never ever break the fourth wall. The show must go on.
Pushing through technical glitches became a defining characteristic for them. But if we want to talk about pushing through absolute chaos, we have to transition from live television to the recording studio.
Oh, here we go.
Specifically, John Lennon's rock and roll album, recorded a decade later. This situation wasn't just a dropped microphone. This was sheer, unadulterated madness.
Madness doesn't even cover it. Let's explain the legal mechanism that forced this album to exist. John didn't wake up and decide to record an album of 1950s covers. He was legally cornered.
Right, the Morris Levy lawsuit.
Yeah, the powerful music publisher Morris Levy sued John because the Abbey Road track, Come Together, borrowed lyrics, specifically the line, "Here come old flat top" from Chuck Berry's song You Can't Catch Me.
And Levy owned the publishing rights to the Chuck Berry catalog.
Exactly. They settled the lawsuit out of court, and the binding agreement dictated that John had to record 3 specific songs owned by Levy's publishing company.
So, facing this legal mandate, John decides to just record an entire album of his favorite 50s and 60s rock standards. To execute this, he hires the legendary and notoriously erratic producer Phil Spector.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, the sessions take place at A&M Studios in Los Angeles, and the environment immediately devolves into a dangerous circus. Spector's behavior was completely untethered from reality. He is showing up to the control room dressed head to toe in a surgeon's outfit.
Wait, a surgeon's outfit?
Yeah.
How?
And at one point, to assert dominance over the musicians, Spector literally unholsters a gun and fires a bullet directly into the studio ceiling.
Which instantly deafens everyone in the room. And if that wasn't enough, someone subsequently spills a bottle of whiskey directly into the intricate circuitry of the main mixing console.
Which effectively gets them banned from the A&M facility.
It's just absolute chaos.
But the absolute climax of this chaos occurs when Spector simply vanishes with the master tapes. You have to understand, these aren't cassette tapes you can slip in a pocket. These are massive, heavy, 2-inch multi-track reels containing weeks of expensive studio work.
And he just took them.
Spector physically removes them from the studio, calls John on the phone, and cryptically refers to the stolen reels as the John Dean tapes.
John Dean was the famous White House counsel who blew the whistle during the Watergate scandal.
Right, so Spector was making a deeply paranoid joke, implying he was holding incriminating evidence hostage.
So you have a producer holding your legally mandated album hostage, and before John can figure out a tactical way to recover the reels, Spector gets into a catastrophic car crash and falls into a coma.
The entire project is paralyzed. By the time John finally navigates the legal hurdles to reclaim the physical tapes, he has completely lost momentum and decides to record and release an entirely different album, Walls and Bridges, first.
And Morris Levy is not happy about that delay.
No. Morris Levy, the publisher who sparked this whole ordeal, gets impatient waiting for his guaranteed royalties. To placate him, John makes a massive tactical error. He hands Levy a rough, unmixed rehearsal tape just to prove the sessions actually happened.
And Levy weaponizes it. He takes that terrible-sounding rough tape, bypasses John's record label entirely, and releases a mail-order bootleg album called Roots. He even bought late-night television commercials to sell it.
The audacity.
Yeah, and this triggers a massive, complex web of lawsuits. Levy ultimately wins a small judgment for breach of contract because John delayed the album, but John countersues for the unauthorized release and wins over $144,000 in damages.
Capitol Records, completely panicked by the bootleg television commercials, is forced to rush release the official, properly mixed rock and roll album just to combat Levy's unauthorized version.
It's amazing it even came out at all.
And yet, despite the lawsuits, the guns, the stolen tapes, and the rush release, the final product is a masterpiece. The visual presentation alone is brilliant. John selected a photograph taken by Jürgen Vollmer back during the early days in Hamburg.
Oh, I know that photo.
The image shows John standing aggressively in a doorway, while 3 blurry, ghostly figures walk past him in the foreground. Those blurred figures are George Harrison, Stuart Sutcliffe, and Paul McCartney.
It is a stunning visual callback to the messy reality of their roots. But sonically, the album is a revelation specifically because the chaotic production forced a change in John's vocal delivery.
How so?
Well, for years, John was deeply insecure about his own natural singing voice. He would constantly demand that studio engineers mask his vocals with heavy processing, specifically artificial double tracking, extreme plate echo, and slapback delay. He wanted to hide behind the technology.
But because these sessions were salvaged from the wreckage of Spector's madness, a lot of that heavy pop star processing was stripped away. Left with no other option, John just sings. The vocal performances are incredibly raw, unadorned, and emotionally vulnerable.
Which provides the perfect thematic bridge into their post-band era, because that raw vulnerability, that shedding of the manufactured pop star facade, was emblematic of how all of them navigated the 1970s.
Yeah, they really went their own ways.
Once the unified, perfect image of the band was dissolved, they fractured into highly distinct, uncompromising individual identities. You can see this psychological divergence most vividly when you analyze how they approached the concept of Christmas songs.
Analyzing the Billboard Top 20 solo holiday hits exposes these conflicting artistic visions perfectly. Let's look at 1971. John releases Happy Xmas, War is Over.
Right.
Now, analyzing the mechanics of the song impartially, it is a heavy political protest anthem deliberately disguised as a holiday standard. John used the traditional waltz time signature common to Christmas carols, layered it with the innocent sound of a children's choir, and used those comforting auditory cues to Trojan horse a stark anti-war message past conservative radio programmers.
Programmers who otherwise would have completely banned a protest song.
Exactly.
You contrast that heavy, calculated political maneuvering with Paul McCartney's 1979 release, Wonderful Christmas Time, and the whiplash is intense. Paul sprinted in the exact opposite direction.
You really did.
He utilized a new synthesizer, the Sequential Circuits Prophet 5, to create an aggressively cheerful, relentlessly bouncy pop earworm. Music critics absolutely skewered it at the time, calling the synthesizer line annoying and labeling it one of the worst holiday cash grabs ever recorded.
But Paul had the last laugh there.
Definitely. Paul understood the mechanics of pop joy better than anyone. That song continues to generate hundreds of thousands of dollars in commercial royalties for him every single year.
And amidst that spectrum of political protest and synthetic pop joy, you have George Harrison, who offers absolute, uncompromising silence.
He didn't write one at all, right?
No, George flatly refused to write a Christmas song. He had developed a strict, deeply researched adherence to Hindu spirituality and Eastern philosophy. For him, writing a commercialized track to celebrate a Western materialist holiday felt hypocritical and spiritually hollow. He chose philosophical authenticity over the guarantee of a massive royalty check.
They all refused to compromise their new identities. But if we are discussing uncompromising artists who absolutely refuse to bend to public expectation or commercial pressure, we have to analyze Yoko Ono.
Oh, absolutely.
Because when you look at the historical timeline, she is the ultimate avant-garde survivor.
The historical context of her life prior to 1969 is vital here. Long before she ever crossed paths with John Lennon, Yoko Ono was an established, formidable artistic force. She was born into an affluent Tokyo family, but her worldview was permanently altered when she survived the horrific World War II firebombings of the city.
That trauma really informed her art.
Yes. By the early 1960s, she was a central figure in the global avant-garde movement. She was performing radical music at Carnegie Hall and staging daring conceptual performance art, like her famous 1964 cut piece. She did not enter John's life as a subordinate. She entered as his artistic equal.
Yet, when they married in 1969, the historical record shows she was met with a tidal wave of severe racism, xenophobia, and misogyny from the Western press and the public.
It was intense.
Society aggressively labeled her using racist dragon lady tropes, relying on harmful Eastern stereotypes to portray her as a manipulative, sinister force who mind-controlled John. The backlash wasn't just in the newspapers, it was physical.
Right, she was attacked in public spaces.
Yes, and the extreme stress contributed to multiple miscarriages. They received constant, terrifying death threats in the mail, including a copy of their double fantasy album that someone had physically shot full of bullet holes.
And to truly comprehend the systemic racial element of this vitriol, you merely have to observe the historical contrast with Linda McCartney.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
The parallels are striking. Both women were American. Both were slightly older than their globally famous British husbands. Both brought children from previous marriages into the relationship. Both were unfairly blamed by fans for the dissolution of the band. And both had their unconventional musical contributions viciously mocked by music critics.
Wow, when you lay it out like that.
Yet Linda McCartney, a white woman, did not face the intense, systemic, and life-threatening racism that Yoko Ono was subjected to daily.
And the most frustrating tragedy of that cultural hatred is how it completely overshadowed the sheer brilliance of her musical mechanics. Take a hard look at her 1970 debut, the Plastic Ono Band album. She utilized traditional kabuki hekkai vocal techniques,
which requires explanation because to Western pop ears, it just sounded like chaos. But kabuki hekkai is a highly disciplined traditional Japanese theatrical practice. It involves compressing the vocal cords to produce raw, ululating strains and guttural cries.
It's very intense.
It is designed to express levels of grief, trauma, and agony that are simply too immense and overwhelming to be contained within a traditional melodic structure. She was using her cultural heritage to process her modern trauma.
But the mainstream rock critics of 1970 just mocked it relentlessly. They called it screaming. But listen to the mechanics of that album now. She is laying the exact aggressive, distorted groundwork for the post-punk era and the feminist riot girl movement decades before those genres even had names.
She directly influenced the vocal stylings of bands like the B-52s, L7, and Hole. Her methodology was entirely ahead of the cultural curve.
Think about it like a time machine.
A time machine.
Yeah, imagine someone like a scientist travels forward to the 1980s post-punk underground club scene, captures that aggressive, raw, searing, distorted energy in a bottle, brings it all the way back to 1970, and unleashes it on an audience who is politely sitting in their living rooms expecting to hear a catchy 3-minute pop tune.
That's a perfect visual.
The audience didn't hate the music because it was bad. They rejected it because they literally did not possess the sonic vocabulary to understand what she was doing yet.
That is the perfect way to frame it. It took several decades for the cultural vocabulary to catch up to her art. But she survived the vitriol and maintained her artistic integrity.
And she was vindicated.
Completely. Which ultimately culminated in her officially receiving co-writing credit for the anthem Imagine in 2017, and historically racking up an astonishing 12 #1 singles on the U.S. dance charts. She outlasted the critics by simply refusing to change.
Which brings this entire historical journey full circle. We started inside a chaotic sunroom with John Lennon tearing apart Stuart Sutcliffe's painted portrait in a moment of unresolved grief, and we explored the forensic geometry required to reconstruct that physical piece of history.
We examined the tactile, physical warmth of crackling mono-vinyl surviving against the sterile convenience of the digital age.
We broke down the mechanics of failing television microphones being conquered by raw adrenaline. We navigated the dangerous, gun-toting studio madness required to create a rock masterpiece. And we watched Yoko Ono's culturally misunderstood avant-garde vocal techniques finally receive the historical respect they demand.
The connecting tissue through all of these stories points to one undeniable mechanical truth. Perfection is inherently sterile. The manicured myth is boring. It is the human connection, the frantic energy, and the unvarnished, flawed authenticity that actually endure the test of time.
So as you walk away from this exploration, I want to leave you with a completely new angle to ponder. History loves to remember this specific band as the ultimate studio professionists, these untouchable geniuses in lab coats who would spend weeks agonizing over the exact frequency of a single tape loop.
Right, the myth of perfection.
But what if their actual enduring legacy has absolutely nothing to do with their perfection? What if their true unmatched genius was their uncanny ability to navigate, absorb, and commercialize absolute catastrophe? Maybe the lawsuits, the broken microphones, the stolen tapes, and the torn paintings are the exact messy mechanisms that kept them human enough to still matter to you today.
Chapter 12.
Ow.
Oh, by the way, a quick reminder. If you like this Beatles content, check out our new book called Beatles Rewind. The ebook is completely free, so you can download and read it immediately on your computer, your phone, or your tablet. Just go to Amazon.com and search for Beatles Rewind, and you can also get it in paperback. The paperback is kind of expensive.
But it's worth every penny.
Okay, weird intro aside, let's just jump straight into it. Think about what you are actually listening to every single day, right? Because if you step back and look at the whole landscape of modern music, there's this massive, unavoidable statistic just hanging over the entire industry.
Yeah, the oldies stat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Over 75% of all music consumed in the United States today is technically classified as an oldie.
Wow.
Yeah. Let that sink in.
Yeah.
You aren't just dipping your toes into the past. We are all just living completely submerged in it.
We should probably define what an oldie even means in today's tracking metrics, though, because it's not what most people think.
Right. It's not just 50s doo-wop. No, not at all. It's based entirely on the 10-year rule. So the industry designates anything released in 2016 or earlier as legacy material.
Which is wild. Like 2016 is an oldie now.
Right. But the fascinating part isn't the rule itself. It's the specific artists sitting at the very top of that mountain. Take Queen, for example.
Oh, yeah.
They are the absolute, undisputed, heavyweight champions of legacy streaming. They pull in over 50 million monthly listeners on Spotify.
50 million? That's insane.
To put that in perspective, they actually have a larger active listening base today than they did during their commercial zenith in the 70s and 80s.
Well, and Brian May and Roger Taylor have been brilliant about keeping that momentum going.
Oh, completely.
They didn't just sit back and watch the royalties roll in. They're out there touring the world's biggest stadiums right now alongside Adam Lambert.
Yeah, making sure the music stays this live communal experience.
Exactly. But it's not just the big arena rock acts doing this. Look at Fleetwood Mac.
Oh, rumors.
Yeah, their album Rumors is basically a permanent resident in the top 20 now. We're talking over 600 weeks on the Billboard 200. And if you want to look at the mechanics of why that happens, I mean, you have to point a massive finger at the TikTok algorithm.
The TikTok time machine. It's just a completely different way of discovering music.
Right.
Historically, music discovery was linear.
Yeah.
You listened to whatever the radio told you was the new hit this week.
Yeah, you didn't have choice.
But modern algorithms, they don't care about release dates. Yeah. They care about audio signatures. They care about engagement.
Right, right.
If an algorithm notices that you linger on a specific tempo or like a certain style of acoustic guitar, It just serves you the song that best fits that vibe, whether it was recorded yesterday or in 1977.
Yeah, think back to 2020. Remember that guy who went viral because he was just casually skateboarding down a highway?
Oh, drinking the cranberry juice?
Oh, yes. Drinking cranberry juice and lip-syncing to Dreams. Because the algorithm pushed that exact vibe to millions of people, that single video spiked the song's global streams by 127%.
And we saw the exact same phenomenon with Kate Bush a couple years later.
Oh, right, with Stranger Things.
Exactly. Her 1985 track, Running Up That Hill, hit #1 a full 37 years after its release, entirely because of that pivotal placement in the show.
Which is just wild.
What you're witnessing is generational skipping on a massive scale.
Yeah.
You have 16-year-olds who are entirely bypassing Taylor Swift to go listen to Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Or they are blasting Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon in their college dorms.
Well, and because of that 10-year rule we mentioned earlier, we also have this entirely bizarre category of what I call the new oldies.
Right, the 2000s stuff.
Yeah. Eminem is currently a top 10 streamed artist globally. Linkin Park and Nirvana have essentially become the classic rock of the 2000s billion stream club.
It's true.
But there is a huge divide in how people actually consume this older music.
How do you mean?
Well, you have the single-song survivors. Think of a band like Journey, right? They're surviving purely on the permanent cultural anthem that is Don't Stop Believing.
Sure.
But you compare that to the full experience legends. When you put on Pink Floyd or Bob Marley's Legend album or ABA Gold, you aren't just shuffling tracks. You are sitting down for a complete start-to-finish journey.
That desire for a full tactile experience is exactly what's driving these massive $35 vinyl sales today, too.
Oh, absolutely.
And in that specific arena, the Beatles remain the absolute gold standard for physical ownership. People don't just want to pull up Abbey Road on a screen.
No, they want to hold it.
They want to physically hold that cardboard sleeve.
Yeah.
The demand for their story is so persistent that it inspires between 20 and 40 new books every single year.
That's a lot of books.
Right. When you buy a physical record, you are basically casting a tangible vote for that artist's permanent place in history.
I want to pause on that, actually, because I have a theory on why you and I and everyone listening are casting those votes.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about modern pop music for a second. The production process today is highly optimized by computers, right? It's designed to be perfectly catchy for a 15-second social media clip.
Yeah, it's very scientific.
Exactly. Every vocal pitch is perfectly corrected. Every drum beat is quantized onto a perfect digital grid. The result is flawless, but it feels sterile. To me, it's like eating a perfectly shaped, totally symmetrical, but stale 2-day-old donut.
Okay, the donut analogy, I like that.
So my question is, are we just nostalgic for the past, or are we actively starving for the human spark?
The human spark.
Yeah, you know, that slight rasp in a singer's throat. Or the drummer rushing the tempo just a fraction of a second during a huge chorus. The actual sound of 4 human beings sweating in a room together.
Oh, the human spark is the entire engine driving this trend. We are absolutely desperate for it. But here is the profound irony of this whole situation.
What's that?
If listeners are flocking to bands like the Beatles, specifically to hear that authentic, unpolished humanity, they're only able to hear it clearly today because we're using cutting-edge artificial intelligence to dig it out.
Man, that is the ultimate paradox. Because for decades, Beatles fans were essentially stuck in the mud, sonically speaking.
Oh, totally.
You had these brilliant historic performances, but the audio quality was notoriously murky, and the footage was incredibly grainy.
It was rough.
Take the 1977 Hollywood Bowl album. They played that show in the entertainment capital of the world, surrounded by millions of dollars of movie studio equipment, and the resulting record still sounded like you were listening to a bad home movie recorded next to a jet engine.
Yeah, you just had to accept the hiss and the sonic mud as part of the authentic 1960s experience. Right. The Peter Jackson's Get Back documentary in 2021 completely changed the paradigm.
It blew my mind.
It was incredible. His team utilized a specific AI technology called MAL, which stands for Machine-Assisted Learning. Because in 1969, the Beatles were often recording onto just a single microphone.
Yeah, all of them at once.
Exactly. John Lennon's guitar, Paul McCartney's bass, Ringo Starr's drums, and all the vocals were just permanently baked together into one single audio track.
So how do you even begin to fix that? I mean, you can't just turn down the drums if they are physically glued to the vocal.
Right. Think of it like a baked cake. Once you bake a cake, you can't just reach in and pull out the eggs.
No.
The ingredients are permanently bound together. But Mel acts as this magic sonic unbaker.
That's a great way to put it.
They trained the AI on hundreds of hours of isolated instruments. It learned the exact mathematical waveform of Paul McCartney's bass versus the specific frequencies of John Lennon's vocal cords.
Wow.
So once the AI understood those unique sonic signatures, it could look at that messy, baked-together track from 1969 and mathematically subtract everything except the vocals, or everything except the guitar.
And that exact breakthrough is what allowed producer Giles Martin to use that same AI demixing technology for the 2022 Revolver remix.
Yes.
Because for the very first time, he could completely isolate Paul McCartney's bass and Ringo Starr's drums from those original 4-track tapes.
Right, giving them space.
Exactly. It allowed those instruments to actually breathe in a modern Dolby Atmos mix. And they didn't even stop at the audio. The visual restoration is just as vital to this.
Oh, the footage looks incredible.
They are taking old 16mm film, using AI to upscale it to 4K resolution, adding highly accurate colorization, and literally inventing new frames to fix the clunky, stuttering frame rates.
Yeah.
The result is that you aren't looking at ancient historical figures anymore. You are looking at vibrant 20-somethings who look like they could be playing a venue down the street tonight.
And that technological leap culminated entirely in the song Now and Then in 2023.
Oh, yeah.
They had this tangled, noisy cassette demo that John Lennon recorded in his apartment in the 1970s. The remaining Beatles had actually tried to finish it back in the 1990s, but they abandoned it.
Because of the piano, right.
Exactly. The piano was completely bleeding into John's vocal microphone and just ruining the track. They couldn't fix it. But using ML, they finally extracted John's voice with crystal clarity, completely removing the piano.
Which is just magic.
Then they added the guitar parts George Harrison had recorded back in 2001, along with brand new parts from Paul and Ringo.
Okay, but I have a major ethical problem with this, and I want to see where you stand.
Oh, here we go.
No, seriously. Are we crossing a line from simply cleaning a dirty window to, like, painting a completely fake landscape on the glass?
That's a fair question.
Right, because back in 1995, Paul McCartney expressed serious concern about releasing alternate takes. He worried it would confuse people about what the official version of a song actually was.
Yeah, the canon.
Exactly. So when does using an algorithm to extract and isolate and polish a 50-year-old cassette stop being an enhancement and officially become a fabrication?
That is the philosophical tightrope the industry is walking right now. Because purists make a very strong argument that the murky, glued-together mix on the original Revolver wasn't a mistake.
No, it was by design.
Right. It was the reality of the medium, and the band made highly specific, creative decisions based on those exact limitations.
Exactly.
So when you use algorithms to pull those tracks apart and rebuild them with modern spacing, you are undeniably creating a version of the song that never actually existed in the 1960s.
Right. It's a new product.
However, the counter-argument is that AI isn't inventing new notes. When you use a computer to isolate Paul McCartney's bass, you are simply removing the sonic dirt so you can finally hear exactly what his fingers physically played in the room that day.
But isn't that a massive contradiction? We're applying all this immaculate futuristic AI to perfect the Beatles' audio, but the band themselves actively rejected mathematical perfection.
Oh, completely.
Their entire magic relied on raw, highly flawed human execution. Just look at something as fundamental as tuning their instruments.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Today, every musician uses a digital tuner calibrated perfectly to A equals 440 hertz. But the Beatles didn't do that. They relied on a quick and dirty tuning reality.
Yep.
They tuned by ear to whatever was sitting around the studio. A piano, a pitch pipe, or sometimes just George Harrison using a harmonica.
It was an entirely practical approach based entirely on feel. I mean, John Lennon would sometimes intentionally tune his D string slightly low.
Wait, really? Intentionally?
Yes, simply because he knew that specific frequency would help his guitar cut through a muddy mono mix.
That is so smart.
And Ringo Starr would throw heavy kitchen tea towels over his snare and tom drums to completely kill the natural overtones.
Yeah.
It created this dead, warm thump.
Yeah, that signature sound.
And producer George Martin frequently utilized Verispeed to change everything anyway.
Right. Verispeed is fascinating for anyone listening who's unfamiliar. That's when you intentionally record the band playing at a normal speed, but then you manually slow down the tape machine during playback. It drops the pitch and makes the instruments sound incredibly heavy and sluggish, like on the song Rain. So if they are constantly warping the tape speed, mathematical perfection was clearly never the goal. Musical cohesion was the only thing that mattered.
And if you want the ultimate proof of their raw power, look at the live at the BBC album released in 1994.
Oh, man, yes.
We are talking about 56 songs, 30 of which were completely unreleased, recorded between 1963 and 1965.
Those sessions were absolute marathons of physical endurance. They were recording up to 18 tracks in a single day.
It is so
insane. People always wonder why there are so many covers on that album. It's simply because they hadn't written enough original material yet to fill those demanding nonstop broadcast schedules.
Right.
So they essentially had to act as musical ambassadors for the British public, bringing over American rhythm and blues and rock and roll from artists like Little Richard, Chuck Berry, and the Marvelettes.
The standout tracks on that collection are just relentless. You have Paul McCartney screaming his lungs out through Lucille, and that's all right, mama.
Oh, his vocal on that is incredible.
You have George Harrison fiercely driving Roll Over Beethoven, and then you get this rare, beautifully tender side of John Lennon on Arthur Alexander's Soldier of Love.
Yeah.
It also includes I'll Be On My Way, which remains the only unreleased Lennon-McCartney track on the entire set.
But getting that album to the public was a total nightmare, right?
Oh, yeah.
Because the BBC routinely erased their master tapes in the 1960s just to save a few pounds on tape costs.
Which is painful to think about.
So to put the album together in the 90s, producers had to dig through illegal bootlegs like Yellow Matter Custard and literally track down fans who had recorded the broadcast by holding cheap microphones up to their living room radios.
What's incredible, though, is that despite relying on those terribly degraded sources, that album sold 8 million copies globally.
Exactly.
The sheer demand for that raw energy directly paved the way for the massive anthology project shortly after.
Which totally validates my donut theory.
Back to the donut.
Think about it. Compare the Beatles' good enough tuning philosophy and those tape hiss-heavy BBC sessions to modern pop stars who will sit in a studio for 12 hours obsessing over being 2 cents sharp on a vocal take.
Yeah, chasing perfection.
The global success of a bootleg-quality, flub-filled BBC album proves that you, sitting in your car or at your desk right now, crave the sweat and the mistakes way more than AI-polished perfection.
It definitely suggests that the flaws are the anchor points for human connection. But if we expand our view to today's industry, we have to ask a highly uncomfortable question.
What's that?
Is humanity even a requirement to be a massive band anymore?
Well, it really doesn't seem to be. We are watching a massive industry pivot away from live musicians.
Yeah.
I was reading about Halsey recently. She is an incredible pop star, but she performs live with a brilliant 12-piece band that is entirely hidden off stage.
Right, out of sight.
They are completely hidden just to maintain this pristine solo aesthetic for the audience. And then you look at Taylor Swift and other stadium megastars who have to rely heavily on pre-recorded backing tracks simply because they are executing intense, breathless choreography.
And in contrast to that, you have someone like Post Malone, who represents this fascinating rebellion against the traditional band structure.
How so?
He tours arenas with absolutely no band on stage. He sings to these bone-rattling, massive backing tracks and commands the entire stage completely alone.
Right.
But then, right in the middle of the set, he will sit down, play a quiet acoustic ballad, and violently smash his guitar into splinters.
Wow.
It's a direct echo of Pete Townshend's autodestructive art from 1964 with The Who. It reinforces this modern idea that the physical instrument is just a disposable prop in a digital show.
But the technology is pushing us way past backing tracks now. We are currently seeing the rise of 100% AI bands. There is a psychedelic rock act called the Velvet Sundown, pulling in 550,000 Spotify listeners, and it features a completely fake, generated frontman named Gabe Farrow.
Crazy.
Or Avempus, which is an outlaw country act with over 1 million listeners, generated entirely by the AI platform Suno. No one in that band has ever held a guitar or suffered a heartbreak, but 1 million people are listening to them.
But while that digital illusion scales up, the physical artifacts of actual human creation are skyrocketing in value in a completely unprecedented way.
Oh, the auctions.
Yes. Just recently, a collector paid $2.85 million for John Lennon's 1964 Framus Hootenanny 12-string acoustic guitar.
Almost $3 million.
That is the specific instrument you hear defining the sound of the Help and Rubber Soul albums.
Think about the irony of someone wiring $2.85 million for that guitar. They aren't buying a piece of wood with metal strings attached to it.
No, not at all.
They are buying the ghost of the human who held it. They are buying the physical sweat embedded in the fretboard. I have a hard time believing that if the Beatles started today, they would just ditch the guitars and rely on algorithms.
You don't think so?
No. An AI can study the Beatles all day long. It can map every chord progression and vocal harmony they ever used, but it can never replicate the desperate magic of John Lennon recording the vocal for Please Please Me in a single day while suffering from a terrible cold.
That's very true.
It cannot replicate the spontaneous friction of four guys playing live on a freezing London rooftop with numb fingers. The desperation creates the magic.
I love that. The algorithm optimizes for efficiency, but human desperation creates permanence. And that desperate need for authentic, flawed humanity is exactly what Paul McCartney is doubling down on right now.
Oh, absolutely.
You can hear it clearly in his new 2026 track, Days We Left Behind, from the upcoming album, The Boys of Dungeon Lane.
The origin story of that song is just incredible. It was born from a classic McCartneyism.
What happened?
He was having a casual tea break in the studio with producer Andrew Watt, picked up a guitar, and accidentally played a chord he didn't even recognize.
Really?
Yeah, it was this seance-like accident, a total mistake, that became the entire emotional foundation of the track. It ended up as a deeply stripped-back acoustic memory song about Forthland Road, which is the specific neighborhood where he and John Lennon first started writing songs together as teenagers.
What's crucial to understand about that track is the production choice. At 83 years old, Paul deliberately left his voice raw and raspy.
He didn't hide it.
Exactly. He completely refused the modern studio tricks that could have easily smoothed out his vocal cords. He wanted the listener to hear the physical toll of time, to emphasize the vast distance between the man he is now and the boy he is singing about.
And he is an absolute master at building anticipation through withholding.
Oh, yeah.
He played these incredibly intimate shows recently at the Fonda Theater in Los Angeles. Everyone expected him to debut the new song, and he completely skipped it.
Left them hanging.
He stuck to classics like Help and Jet, which just drove fan demand for the raw studio version of the new track completely through the roof.
He is dictating his legacy on his own terms now, which ties perfectly into the 2026 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame exhibition that is finally opening, dedicated entirely to Paul McCartney and Wings.
Which feels long overdue, by the way.
Extremely overdue.
For 40 years, Wings was routinely dismissed by music critics as this lightweight vanity project. People wrote about it as if he was just dragging his family around on stage for fun.
Yeah, they take it seriously.
But if you look at the actual numbers, they completely dominated the 1970s. They had 7 top 10 hits: Band on the Run, Silly Love Songs, Live and Let Die. These were massive, undeniable cultural moments.
The new exhibit forces those critics to swallow their pride. Because when you look at Paul's handwritten lyric behind the glass and you see the heavily toured session instruments, it proves that Wings was a legitimate, stadium-filling juggernaut that required massive human effort. Paul was inducted into the Hall of Fame as a Beatle, and later as a solo artist. But Wings was never inducted separately, which remains a staggering institutional oversight.
So why did it take 40 years for Wings to get this level of respect? I mean, why was it so impossible for critics in the 70s to accept Paul McCartney's human, flawed, stadium rock evolution? Was it simply because they couldn't stop comparing him to the untouchable, pristine mythology of Sgt. Pepper?
Honestly, yes. When you create a cultural monolith like Sgt. Pepper, you trap yourself in amber.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Everything you do afterward is judged against a myth rather than reality. The critics desperately wanted the polished conceptual perfection of the Beatles' studio years, but Paul was offering them a real, sweating, working rock band in Wings.
Yeah.
It took 4 decades for the culture to realize that the raw human effort behind Wings was the exact thing that made them great.
So bringing this all full circle back to what you're listening to today and the future of where music is actually heading. We started by talking about how older music, packed with all those human imperfections, is dominating our listening habits. We explored how AI is currently being used to clean up those old recordings, while simultaneously being used to generate entirely new fake bands, pulling in millions of listeners.
The line between a restored human performance and a generated digital illusion is blurring incredibly fast.
So I want to leave you with a final thought that pushes past the algorithm.
Okay.
If artificial intelligence gets so good at perfectly replicating our flaws, intentionally programming in fake vocal rasps, slight off-tempo drum beats, and synthetic happy accidents, then recorded music might lose its intrinsic value entirely.
Wow.
If you can never be sure if a recording is human or AI, then the ultimate luxury status symbol in the future won't be a perfect stream or even a pristine vinyl record. It will be sitting in a small, crowded room, watching a real human physically sweat over an instrument, knowing for an absolute fact that what you are hearing will never exist anywhere else.
The live, unrepeatable moment becomes the only truth left. Chapter 13. Next. So, if you are listening to this right now, I want you to just picture the year 2025.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. So the Grammy Award for Best Rock Performance is being announced.
Right.
And the nominees include these massive, currently active heavyweights. You've got Pearl Jam, Green Day, St. Vincent.
Right.
And the winner, the Beatles.
Which is why, and we should clarify here, this was not like a Lifetime Achievement Award.
No, not at all.
It wasn't some legacy nod. They won a highly competitive modern Grammy for a song called Now and Then.
Exactly. And Sean Lennon gets up on stage to accept the award, and he says something that just, it stops you in your tracks. He essentially says, play the Beatles music to your kids. I feel like the world can't afford to forget about people like the Beatles.
Wow.
Yeah. And that idea, and not letting the world forget that is a massive, just sprawling reality we are unpacking today. We are looking at how the legacy of the most famous band in history is actively being resurrected and imitated and just culturally contested right now.
Because if you remember back to 2023,
oh yeah,
when Paul McCartney first mentioned they were using AI to finish a track, people absolutely lost their minds.
Fans were completely livid.
Oh yeah, the immediate assumption was that AI meant like a fabricated John Lennon. They pictured this digital ghost that had been synthesized from training data.
Right, like a deepfake.
Exactly. So Paul McCartney had to come out and aggressively clarify that nothing was artificially created. They had simply, cleaned up an existing recording.
And Ringo Starr backed him up too, right?
He did, yeah. He pointed out that they would never fake John Lennon's voice and that working on the track was incredibly emotional because it was the closest they would ever come to, having him back in the room.
Okay, hold on. Let's break down this technology because this is where I get a little stuck.
Sure.
The dividing line here is fascinating. They use something called MAL, or machine audio learning. Now, I know the raw audio for Now and Then was this muddy cassette tape labeled To Paul that John Lennon recorded in his Dakota apartment.
Right.
And I know George Harrison shelved the project back in the 90s because the audio quality was just too poor. The piano was bleeding into the vocal track. But how does a machine actually fix that? I understand how a chatbot generates text, but how do you separate a voice from a piano on a single flattened piece of tape?
That is the crucial distinction here. It's the difference between extractive AI and generative AI.
Okay.
So the ML software, which was developed by Peter Jackson's team for the Get Back documentary, it doesn't invent anything. It is purely extractive.
Meaning it just takes things out.
Exactly. To get it to work, the team had to train the machine learning algorithms on thousands of isolated stems. Essentially, they taught the computer exactly what John Lennon's vocal frequency looks like.
Oh, interesting.
And exactly what a piano frequency looks like. So once the machine understood that specific sonic fingerprint, it could go into that terrible cassette tape and just, pull John Lennon's voice away from the piano and all that background hiss.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of like a digital archaeological dig. You're taking these incredibly precise algorithmic brushes and just carefully dusting the dirt off a genuine artifact.
That is a great way to put it. It isolated an irreducibly human moment, a performance that actually happened.
Right.
And because of that extraction, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr and George Harrison, using guitar tracks he recorded back in 2001, could actually collaborate on a clean mix.
That is amazing.
But then you look at the other side of the spectrum, generative AI. And this is where the controversy just explodes. In May 2023, a YouTube creator named Daylims went viral with these unauthorized deepfakes.
Wait, what did they do exactly?
Well, they took Paul McCartney's 2013 solo track, No, de-aged his voice, and generated AI John Lennon harmonies.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then they took John Lennon's posthumous song, Grow Old With Me, and built a full arrangement around it with a completely synthesized Paul McCartney vocal.
So this creator just fed their voices into a program and had the computer synthesize new notes that John Lennon never actually sang.
Yes. They generated performances that never existed. And the emotional whiplash for fans was severe. I mean, you look at the comments on those videos and people are saying things like, I start crying every time.
Wow.
They felt like they were getting a proper ending to a story that was tragically cut short. And to be fair, Daylims was completely transparent. They labeled the videos explicitly as AI created creations with no intent to deceive. But Universal Music Group still brought down the hammer with massive legal takedowns, basically scrubbing most of it from the internet.
See, I have to push back on that corporate response.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you're a fan listening to this, what do you think? Like, if someone makes a track with total transparency, clearly labeling it as an AI tribute, does that actually hurt the band's legacy?
That is the big question.
Or is a massive legal takedown just tone deaf? Because it feels like banning a book, it only makes people want to seek it out more. And from what I understand, there is an entire, like, what-if factory operating underground right now.
Oh, absolutely. People are creating these Black Album projects. They use stem separation on 1970s solo albums like Imagine and All Things Must Pass, remixing them to sound like all four men were in the same room.
That is wild.
They're taking George Harrison's solo debut and adding AI John Lennon and Paul McCartney backing vocals to it. There's even a reversed version of I Wanna Be Your Man floating around.
Wait, reversed how?
Well, fans used AI to have the band sing the song with the rougher roar arrangement of the Rolling Stones. So they're essentially taking back the hit they gave away in 1963.
That is so crazy to think about.
It is, but it highlights this really complicated ethical middle ground. Extractive AI restores what is real. Generative AI invents performances that never happened.
Right.
Even with good intentions and transparent labeling, you are putting words into the mouths of dead men. When the technology becomes so flawless that you cannot tell the difference by ear, that little text disclaimer becomes the only ethical load-bearing wall we have left.
Yeah, that is a scary thought. But you know what's fascinating about this whole debate?
What's that?
Millions of people are arguing online about the ethics of these digital simulations, right? While at the exact same time, millions of fans are spending billions of dollars on physical simulations.
No, absolutely.
You can't see the original band live anymore. But if you step away from the internet, you could absolutely go buy a ticket to the next best thing right now.
And the scale of that industry is massive. We are talking about 1.7 million annual tribute band ticket sales in the U.S. alone.
Wait, 1.7 million?
Yeah. In some markets, tribute acts make up more than 25% of all live music bookings.
So 1 in 4 live gigs in some areas is just someone playing someone else's music.
Exactly. The broader live music market is projected to hit $25.81 billion by 2030, and tribute bands have carved out a highly lucrative, sustainable niche within that ecosystem.
Okay, but the Beatles completely dominate this space, don't they?
They do. They tie with Journey for the #1 most searched tribute acts in the U.S. There are at least 24 notable major tribute bands listed, and that is just the tip of the iceberg.
But why them specifically? Like, why is there such a massive market for this one band over, say, Led Zeppelin or The Doors?
There are 4 key reasons. First, the visual narrative.
Okay.
They had incredibly distinct eras. You have the early Mop-Top suits, the vibrant Sgt. Pepper psychedelia, the White Album facial hair, the rooftop concert look.
Right, so it gives a tribute band built-in costume changes and a theatrical structure.
Exactly. Led Zeppelin wore essentially the same outfits for a decade, so there is no theater in that. Second is the catalog. They have 213 songs spanning a massive stylistic range.
Right.
Third is finality. There is zero chance of a real reunion. And finally, youth appeal. Almost 50% of all their Spotify streams come from listeners under 30.
Wow, under 30.
Yeah. These are generations for whom a tribute band is their absolute only chance to experience this music in a shared live setting.
And the productions are huge. I mean, you have acts like Rain, which evolved into a massive Broadway run.
Yes.
You have the Fab Four, who are Emmy-nominated, 1964, The Tribute, who focus obsessively on the early touring years. And then my personal favorite, the Analogs from the Netherlands.
Oh, they are incredible.
They don't even wear the wigs. They just haul period-accurate analog gear onto the stage and play the complex later studio albums live. But let's talk about the money, because this is where people get cynical.
Yeah.
I've seen that tickets range from $25 up to $931 for VIP experiences.
Right.
Private gigs can pull in anywhere from $1,700 to $15,000. So aren't these just, I don't know, derivative carnival acts, just guys playing dress up, cashing in on boomer nostalgia?
See, that stereotype completely misunderstands what the top-tier tribute acts are actually doing.
Okay, how so?
They are engaged in historical preservation. Think about it this way. When a symphony orchestra plays Beethoven or a theater troupe performs Shakespeare, we don't accuse them of a failure of originality, right?
Well, no, of course not.
We don't call them a carnival act. We understand they are keeping a vital repertoire alive in the present tense. These musicians are doing the exact same thing.
Oh, I see what you mean.
They are mastering the exact vocal inflections, the precise tone of a specific Rickenbacker bass, the distinct drumming style of Ringo Starr. They are allowing a crowd of strangers to gather in a room and share the kinetic energy of a live performance.
So it's not just some cover band at a bar. It's a hyper-specific forensic audio recreation.
Precisely. People literally weep in the audience hearing the White Album performed with that level of accuracy.
You know what's deeply ironic to me, though?
What's that?
You have these guys in 2024 agonizing over hitting the exact vocal inflection on a record. But the band themselves, when they record those early tracks, they were actively mimicking someone else, specifically Americans.
Yes, the accent paradox. It is one of the most intriguing linguistic quirks in pop music history.
It's so weird.
When you listen to John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr speak in interviews, they have thick, working-class Liverpool Scouse accents.
Very thick.
But the moment they start singing early tracks like She Loves You, the Britishness almost entirely vanishes. They sound overwhelmingly American.
There is this iconic moment from the 1964 JFK Airport press conference. A reporter point-blank asks them why they speak with British accents but sing like Americans.
And John Lennon's response is amazing.
He just leans into the microphone and bluntly says, because it sells better.
It is a hilarious, cynical answer, but it's only half the truth.
Right.
The reality is that they, like most British rock acts of the era, learned to play by obsessively studying American R&B and rock artists. Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Elvis.
Right, they're heroes.
Exactly. Those voices were the blueprint for the genre. So when they sang with an Americanized inflection, they weren't just trying to move units. They were speaking the authentic sonic language of the music they idolized.
But wait, the layers of code switching go even deeper than that, don't they?
Yeah.
I remember reading that John Lennon's background wasn't even as rough as his accent made it sound. Didn't his Aunt Mimi have something to do with that?
Oh, yes. The Aunt Mimi irony perfectly illustrates this. She raised John Lennon in a respectable, middle-class suburban home in Woolton, and she constantly complained about his accent. She believed he was deliberately exaggerating a rough, working-class Liverpool accent to sound tough and fit in with the rock and roll crowd.
Wow, so you have a guy who is potentially faking a rough British accent when he talks to his friends.
Yeah.
And then immediately switching to fake an American accent when he sings into a microphone.
Code switching twice?
That is wild.
Yeah.
But does putting on an American accent to sell records make early music fake? Like, if authenticity is the gold standard we judge artists by today, isn't adopting another country's vocal style a form of selling out?
Not at all. It actually illustrates the broader truth of pop music. It is an endless interprofessional cultural exchange.
Okay.
Modifying an accent isn't inherently inauthentic. It's just adopting the vocabulary of a genre. And what's brilliant is watching this phenomenon happen in reverse decades later.
Oh.
You have American artists deliberately faking British accents to gain indie or art rock credibility. Brandon Flowers of The Killers, Ezra Koenig of Vampire Weekend, Karen O, Greta Van Fleet.
That's true.
They adopt UK-style vocal inflections to connect themselves to the legacy of British post-punk or classic rock.
So it's this continuous transatlantic mirror, which honestly is a perfect way to look at how we interpret them in general.
Definitely.
How we view their accents or how we view their lyrics completely shifts depending on what era we are standing in. And that collision of eras became incredibly visible and honestly super uncomfortable in 2010.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, when a lyric written in 1962 collided head-on with modern comedy at the White House.
Let's set the scene for this because the context is crucial here.
Please do.
June 2, 2010, the East Room of the White House. Paul McCartney is there to receive the Gershwin Prize for Popular Song. President Obama is in the front row.
So high stakes.
It is an incredibly prestigious, elegant event celebrating a living legend, and Jerry Seinfeld takes the microphone.
If you're listening to this, just imagine the most formal, high-stakes, lifetime achievement event possible. The President of the United States is watching you.
Exactly. And Seinfeld decides this is the perfect time to do a bit about the opening track of the debut album, I Saw Her Standing There. He zeroes in on the opening lyric, specifically the line about the girl being 17, and heavily implies that law enforcement in D.C. might want to look into Paul McCartney's behavior.
So he essentially does an edgy statutory rape joke at a man's lifetime honor ceremony in front of the president.
Yep.
I just can't get over the setting for this. Did anyone actually stop him?
No, people laughed. Even Paul McCartney seemed to laugh, later calling it satirical. But the joke exposes a fascinating friction about how we judge art.
How so?
Well, in 1962, when Paul McCartney wrote that song, he was 20 years old. The age of consent in the UK was 16. The original lyric was actually "never been a beauty queen" before they changed it to the cheekier phrase we all know.
Right.
It was a completely standard, fictional teenage dance trope. It wasn't a predatory confession. But Seinfeld's joke relies entirely on deliberately ignoring that context and applying the moral and legal frameworks of 2010 to a 50-year-old pop song.
But if you are watching that happen live, you have to be thinking, why is this appropriate? Did he get any pushback for this later?
It did spark real criticism. Jenny Singer at The Forward wrote a piece calling out Seinfeld for a consistent pattern of questionable jokes.
And was there a pattern?
There was, especially when it comes to the McCartney family. Fast forward to 2014 at Lincoln Center. Jerry Seinfeld is hired to host an honor ceremony for Stella McCartney's fashion career.
Okay.
And instead of honoring her, he spends 20 minutes mocking the fashion industry, asking why most people look disgusting.
Wow.
It got so tense that Paul McCartney actually stepped on stage and told Seinfeld, "You grilled my daughter." It wasn't all fun.
Why do we accept this social contract? Someone gets a prestigious lifetime honor and a comedian shows up to just roast them in front of their peers.
That is exactly the point. Seinfeld's joke at the White House isn't fascinating because it's a comedic masterpiece. It's fascinating because it forces us to ask how we interact with the past.
Right.
Do we grant 1962 artifacts immunity based on their historical context, or do we hold them accountable to modern standards?
It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is. Oh, I mean, absolutely it is.
Whether we are talking about Peter Jackson's MAL technology, trying to isolate a real voice from a noisy cassette, or a tribute band agonizing over the exact drum tuning for a Sgt. Pepper track, or musicians adopting transatlantic accents, or comedians recontextualizing a 60-year-old lyric.
Yes.
They aren't just a catalog of songs from the 1960s. They are this massive, constantly evolving mirror that reflects our current culture, our shifting expectations, and our desires.
They are a lens through which we constantly renegotiate our relationship with the past. Every time someone trains an algorithm on those stems, or buys a ticket to a tribute show, or argues about a joke referencing a 1962 lyric, they are keeping that legacy in the present tense.
And that leaves you with something to really chew on.
Definitely.
As generative AI becomes absolutely flawless, and as a tribute band's amp tones and vocal harmonies become completely indistinguishable from the original records, does the objective authenticity of the musician even matter anymore? If you are standing in a crowd and the music makes the hairs on your arms stand up, is the emotion you feel in your chest the only thing that's actually real? Chapter 14. Read, watch, listen.
Oh, by the way, a quick reminder, if you like this Beatles content, check out our new book called Beatles Rewind. The ebook is completely free, so you can download and read it immediately on your computer, your phone, or your tablet. Just go to Amazon.com and search for Beatles Rewind, and you can also get it in paperback. The paperback is kind of expensive.
But it's worth every penny.
Okay, so let's break down this entire phenomenon. Because, when you look closely at the historical records, the documentaries, and the film archives we are exploring today, you quickly realize that the story you probably know about this band is almost entirely a polished, sanitized myth.
Right.
And to find the actual human beings underneath all that, we have to start by pulling apart their origin story in 1962. If you watch the documentary Evolver .62, which leans heavily on the forensic historical research of Mark Lewison, it completely dismantles the standard fairy tale.
Yeah, Lewison's approach in his book, All These Years, provides this incredible grounding effect. The documentary actually opens with him standing on a modern-day London street, holding up a grainy 1962 photograph against the actual brick wall it depicts.
Oh, that is a great visual trick.
It is. By anchoring them to a physical space, it instantly reminds you that these weren't mythological deities who just fell from the sky fully formed. I mean, they were four working-class guys from Liverpool making highly calculated strategic decisions.
And nothing was more calculated than the famous Decca Records audition, right? This is treated as the ultimate pop culture legend. The accepted narrative is that Decca rejected them on January 1st, 1962, claiming guitar groups were on the way out.
That is the famous line, yeah.
It is consistently framed as the biggest blunder in music history. But the documentary reveals the negotiations were far more nuanced than just a flat rejection.
Oh, absolutely. The reality of the 1962 British music industry is much more complicated. Pressing physical vinyl was a very expensive, resource-heavy process. Decca actually saw immense value in the band, and they didn't slam the door at all.
Wait, really? They didn't just turn them away?
No, they offered a deal where the band could record for the label, but there was a significant catch. Their manager, Brian Epstein, would have to foot the bill to manufacture the physical records himself. And Epstein, quite understandably, refused to take on that huge financial risk.
Wow, so Decca wasn't dismissing their talent at all, they just wanted to mitigate their financial exposure. That completely flips the clueless executive narrative on its head.
Exactly.
And what makes that even more fascinating is that Decca also offered to publish their original songs. Keep in mind, in early 1962, John Lennon and Paul McCartney were still largely functioning as a cover band.
Right, they were just beginning to find their footing as composers.
Yeah, so Decca recognized the genius in the writing and wanted the publishing rights. They simply didn't want to risk the capital on pressing the physical media.
Which fundamentally shifts the story from a tale of executives missing the boat to just a standard, cautious business negotiation that fell through. But that perceived rejection acted as a massive catalyst. It forced the band to look inward and become incredibly ruthless about engineering their own success.
And that ruthlessness is perfectly visible in how they package themselves, specifically the matching Pierre Cardin suits.
Oh, the suits, yes.
The conventional wisdom is that Brian Epstein forced them to abandon their cool leather jacket aesthetic from Hamburg and put on these stucky suits. The popular myth frames them as being domesticated or selling out to corporate interests, but the historical record tells a completely different story.
It was a proactive strategy. The band actually designed those suits themselves.
Oh.
It wasn't a surrender to management at all. It was a Trojan horse.
A Trojan horse, I love that.
You have to understand the environment of early 1960s British broadcasting. The gatekeepers at the BBC were incredibly conservative. They would never put a band on television that looked like they just crawled out of a gritty Reaper Bond dive bar at 4 a.m.
Right, so they knew they needed to project a safe, approachable image just to get inside the building. I love looking at this through the lens of a cutthroat, modern tech startup. They were entirely focused on optimizing their product for the target market.
That's a great way to put it.
They were pivoting their brand identity to secure distribution through the BBC. And just like a ruthless startup, if you are gunning for an IPO, you aren't afraid to push out early co-founders who just cannot scale with the company's vision.
Which perfectly frames the firing of Pete Best. This decision has been debated endlessly, with people constantly searching for personal vendettas or dramatic interpersonal conflicts. But the evidence points to a cold-blooded business calculation. They were building an organization designed for unprecedented scale, and they realized their current rhythm section had a ceiling. They needed a specific driving sound to reach the next level.
So they optimized the product. They made the clinical decision to bring in Ringo Starr, essentially upgrading their hardware right before launch. It was brutal, but it worked.
It absolutely worked.
They engineered a flawless launch pad that rocketed them to superstardom in the UK. However, successfully building a machine that powerful means you eventually lose control of it. Nothing they meticulously planned in 1962 could have prepared them for the terrifying, uncontrollable physical chaos that awaited them when they scaled globally and landed in America in 1964.
Yeah, to understand that sheer loss of control, you have to watch the Maysles brothers documentary chronicling their first U.S. visit. This is a vital cultural artifact because it utilizes direct cinema.
Right. Before the 1960s, documentaries relied on massive tripod-mounted cameras and heavy lighting rigs, which meant every scene had to be heavily staged.
Exactly. But the Maysles had newly developed lightweight 16mm cameras with synchronized sound. They could simply follow the band into moving cars and cramped hotel rooms, acting as invisible observers.
And what they captured at JFK Airport on February 7th, 1964, wasn't some rehearsed promotional wave. It was genuine, raw shock. You can literally see the panic in their eyes as they confront the overwhelming volume of the screaming crowds.
It is so visceral.
And the crazy thing is, the Maysles only got that gig because Granada Television's original crew fell through at the last minute. If a traditional production team had been there, we would have just gotten a sterile, heavily managed newsreel.
Yeah, and the agility of the Maysles equipment also led to one of the most brilliant improvisations in documentary filmmaking, the Ed Sullivan workaround.
Oh, I love this story.
So CBS strictly prohibited the brothers from bringing their cameras into the studio to film the actual performance on the Ed Sullivan Show. They were totally locked out.
So instead of packing up and going home, they pivot. They take their cameras out into the streets of New York, find an apartment where they can hear the broadcast playing through a window, knock on the door, and ask to film an American family watching the performance on their tiny living room television set.
It completely shifts the perspective of the historical record. You aren't just watching a band perform a song. You are watching an entire culture shift on its axis in real time.
Yeah.
You are seeing the phenomenon land right in a normal American living room.
But the psychological weight of that fame had to be crushing, which is why the film A Hard Day's Night is such a crucial piece of this puzzle. To the casual viewer, it looks like a documentary where they are just improvising and goofing off.
But it was highly scripted by screenwriter Alun Owen. Owen embedded with the band, traveled with them, and meticulously transcribed their natural conversational rhythms and their defensive banter.
Right, he captured how they actually spoke.
Yeah, and when the film premiered, critics like Bosley Crowther of the New York Times immediately compared them to the Marx Brothers.
The Marx Brothers, right.
Because the Marx Brothers famously used anarchic rapid-fire humor to dismantle upper-class WASP society on screen. Crowther saw these four working-class guys from Liverpool using that exact same weaponized wit to dismantle the pretension of the press and the establishment.
You definitely see that in the famous press conference scenes. When a reporter asks John Lennon, "How did you find America?" he just deadpans, turn left at Greenland. Or when George Harrison is asked if success has changed his life, and he plainly says yes and just stares silently at the reporter.
So good.
But let me challenge this Marx Brothers comparison for a second. Without the context of the crushing fame, doesn't that just look like four bratty, ungrateful kids mocking the people trying to interview them?
I mean, it is easy to view it that way out of context, but John Lennon actually pushed back against that exact comparison later in his life. The Marx Brothers were deliberate agents of chaos. Their entire comedic premise was storming into organized society with the explicit goal of breaking it.
Right, they wanted to cause trouble.
Exactly. The band, in 1964, was doing the exact opposite. They were trapped inside a terrifying, grinding machinery of global fame, and they were using absurdist humor as a psychological defense mechanism. They weren't trying to create chaos. They were using deflection to stay sane while completely surrounded by it.
Humor as a survival tactic. But you can only deflect for so long before the pressure cracks the hull. By 1966, the physical danger and the sheer noise became completely unsustainable. So they pull the plug.
Yeah, they stopped touring entirely.
They vanish into the controlled environment of Abbey Road Studios, collaborating with George Martin and Jeff Emmerich, and they start constructing intricate studio masterpieces like Sgt. Pepper.
But stepping out of the spotlight like that creates a highly dangerous dynamic. When the most famous people on Earth suddenly stop appearing in public, they create a massive information vacuum. And the fans, desperate for connection, rushed in to fill that vacuum with pure paranoia.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the fall of 1969 and the famous Paul is Dead hoax, extensively detailed in Andrew J. Reeves' book, Turn Me On, Dead Man. The premise of the rumor was that Paul McCartney had died in a horrific car crash in 1966 and had been secretly replaced by an orphan double named William Campbell.
It sounds like a ridiculous punchline today, but you have to look at the media mechanisms of 1969. This wasn't a passing joke. It swept college campuses and underground radio stations. Fans became convinced that the band, riddled with guilt over the cover-up, was secretly planting elaborate clues in their album art and lyrics.
The clues are absolute masterpieces of collective delusion.
Oh, they're fascinating case studies in confirmation bias. Fans pointed to the Abbey Road album cover, obsessing over the fact that Paul McCartney was walking barefoot, which they decided definitively symbolized a corpse in a funeral procession.
Right, and they fixated on a Volkswagen license plate in the background that read 28IF, reasoning he would have been 28 if he had lived, conveniently ignoring that he was actually 27 at the time.
Exactly. And the deeper they dug, the wilder it got. On the Sgt. Pepper cover, he is wearing a patch that reads OPD, which fans insisted meant officially pronounced dead.
And then came the audio manipulation. People manually spun their turntables backward to play the avant-garde track Revolution 9 in reverse, convincing themselves the chaotic noise formed the phrase, "Turn me on, dead man."
Or the fade out of Strawberry Fields Forever, where John Lennon supposedly mutters a confession, "I buried Paul."
When in fact, if you isolate the audio track, he was just bizarrely muttering the words cranberry sauce.
Cranberry sauce.
But what makes this historical record so vital is examining how the contagion actually spread. It gained minor traction after a caller named Tom phoned into a Detroit radio station. But the true catalyst was an article published in the Michigan Daily by a university student named Fred Laber.
Right, and he wrote a deadpan satirical review where he invented many of these clues entirely out of thin air just to mock the rumor.
But the mechanism of media syndication took over. Underground college papers shared the article, wire services picked it up, and the mainstream media completely swallowed the satire as legitimate investigative journalism.
It is wild.
You look at this 1969 hoax, and it looks exactly like modern internet sleuths on Reddit conspiracy boards, or fans trying to decode Taylor Swift lyrics to find secret messages. This was the exact historical moment the fans decided they owned the narrative more than the creators did.
And it created an impossible puzzle for Apple Corps press officer Derek Taylor. I mean, he was fielding thousands of calls from panicked fans and serious journalists. How do you issue an official corporate denial for something so inherently ridiculous without sounding like you were just the mouthpiece for a massive government-level cover-up?
It really can't win.
No. And the band members themselves were trapped between immense frustration at the intrusion and finding the sheer creativity of the delusion highly amusing.
So if the fans were unintentionally distorting their reality with conspiracy theories in the late 60s, it raises a fascinating question. How did the actual band members react a decade later when comedians intentionally distorted their legacy for laughs?
Surprisingly, they reacted with genuine appreciation, for the most part. In 1978, comedians Eric Idle and Neil Innes created a brilliant television mockumentary called The Ruddles, which chronicled the rise and fall of the Prefab Four.
The attention to detail in this parody was staggering. You had characters named Dirk McQuickley, Ron Nasty, Stig O'Hara, and Barry Womb.
Barry Womb.
A direct parody of Ringo Starr changing his name from Richard Starkey. So Richard Starkey becomes Ringo Starr, meaning Barry Womble becomes Barry Womb. The layers of the joke are absolutely perfect.
And the music Neil Innes composed was incredible. He didn't just write funny lyrics, he reverse-engineered the actual chord progressions and production styles. Songs like Cheese and Onions and Hold My Hand were pristine pastiches of specific eras. But how did the guys actually feel about having their entire lives lampooned on television?
George Harrison loved it.
He loved it so much he actually secured a cameo in the film, playing a television reporter, interviewing a man outside the Ruddles headquarters. John Lennon was also a huge fan. He loved the preview tape so much he refused to return it. But Lennon, with his sharp eye for the brutal realities of the music business, gave Neil Innes a very prescient warning. He pointed out that the Ruddles song Get Up and Go sounded entirely too close to the structural DNA of Get Back, and he warned Innes that ATV music would sue them.
Which is exactly what happened. ATV owned the publishing rights to the catalog at the time, and they aggressively sued. They eventually forced Innes into a settlement where he had to surrender 50% of the royalties on the original parody soundtrack. The corporate machinery literally has no sense of humor.
None at all.
What about the other two members?
Well, Ringo Starr appreciated the early, lighthearted scenes, but he felt the second half of the film, which ruthlessly parodied their bitter, litigious breakup, hit far too close to home. He famously joked to journalists that they should have combined the two bands to form the Brutals.
That is pretty funny.
Yeah. Paul McCartney, however, gave the project a very frosty reception initially. He was highly protective of his legacy. It wasn't until his wife, Linda, intervened and convinced him to laugh at the absurdity of it all, especially since her own parody counterpart was played by Bianca Jagger, that he finally softened his stance.
It is fascinating to contrast the polished, affectionate, highly structured parody of the Ruddles with the reality of what John Lennon was actually doing at that exact time. If you examine the documentary film 1 to 1, which chronicles his life in New York City in 1972, you are looking at a completely different universe.
Oh, entirely.
Sean Lennon recently oversaw the restoration of this footage, which centers on a benefit concert organized for the Willowbrook State School.
Yes, the film documents this benefit concert, which was organized after an investigative report by Geraldo Rivera exposed severe neglect and abuse at this facility for children with disabilities. We are, of course, just analyzing the historical record here, not endorsing the specific politics, but John and Yoko immediately organized this concert.
And this wasn't a slick, heavily managed corporate arena tour. John was backed by Elephant's Memory, which was a gritty, saxophone-heavy New York street rock band. The performance was loud, it was crunchy, and it was intensely political. He was actively trying to build a messy, authentic, aggressively post-Beatles identity.
But the way the documentary is constructed introduces a very jarring stylistic choice.
Yeah.
During this period, John was highly paranoid that the FBI was wiretapping his phone, which, to be fair to his paranoia, historical records confirm they definitely were.
Right.
So to protect himself, he recorded his own phone conversations. The filmmakers use those audio recordings extensively to provide context, but they only display them as silent text captions on a black screen.
Oh, that sounds awful to watch.
It is. Imagine watching this gritty, chaotic street rock concert. The energy in the room is peaking, and suddenly the screen just cuts to black with white subtitles of a wiretapped phone call. It is a massive visual buzzkill that rips you right out of the history.
It is a frustrating viewing experience, sure, but that very tension in the editing perfectly mirrors the broader tension of their entire historical legacy. You have John Lennon, who during the 1970s largely embraced the chaos, the political messiness, and the unvarnished reality of his life.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you have Paul McCartney, who has spent decades meticulously working to correct the record, organize the archives, and protect his reputation. You see this effort clearly in his authorized biography, Many Years From Now, or his recent book, The Lyrics, where he actively pushes back against narratives he felt unfairly marginalized him, specifically targeting Philip Norman's highly subjective biography Shout.
And that specific friction, the battle between presenting a messy, authentic truth versus a clean, frictionless, highly polished narrative, is exactly what is happening to their history right now.
Let's look at the highly controversial 2025 Disney Plus streaming re-edit of the Beatles anthology.
Right, this specific release has caused a massive uproar among historians and archivists. The original anthology documentary series, released on DVD back in 2003, featured 8 comprehensive episodes. They averaged about 75 minutes each, allowing the story to genuinely breathe. But when the beautifully restored 4K version arrived on Disney Plus in 2025, eagle-eyed fans immediately noticed a significant change.
They cut it down, didn't they?
They aggressively trimmed down every single episode to clock in under 60 minutes. Disney had systematically cut roughly an hour of total history from the documentary.
Okay, let me step in and play devil's advocate for a second.
Go ahead.
We live in an era of unprecedented access. Every single pristine television performance, from the Ed Sullivan Show to their later promotional music videos, is readily available to stream in high definition on YouTube. If Disney decides to remove some of that redundant performance footage to make the documentary flow faster, aren't they just trimming the fat to make it bingeable for a modern generation that might not want to sit through an 8-hour history lesson?
Well, that argument forces us to define what we consider fat in a historical record. Because the archivists quickly realized Disney didn't just cut redundant music videos to save time, they cut the deeply human anecdotes. They cut the texture.
Ah, so they lost the good stuff.
Exactly. For example, they completely removed Paul McCartney's story about getting arrested during their early days in Hamburg. He and Pete Best were living in squalor behind a cinema, and as a petty rebellion against a club owner, they nailed a condom to a concrete wall and set it on fire.
Wow.
The stunt resulted in them spending 3 hours in a German jail before being unceremoniously deported.
See, that is the ultimate story of reckless, chaotic, working-class teenagers. It completely humanizes them.
Right. But it didn't fit the clean narrative. They also aggressively trimmed down the extended raw footage of their very first American concert at the Washington Coliseum. By tightening the edit, you lose the visible, visceral sense of them being entirely overwhelmed by the deafening energy in that circular arena.
So they basically smoothed over all the chaos.
Disney's editing team prioritized narrative momentum and algorithmic pacing over historical completeness. They made a calculated assumption that modern streaming audiences lack the attention span for detailed, rambling storytelling.
But the cost of that pacing is enormous. By removing those petty, reckless stories like the condom fire or smoothing out the panic in Washington, you take 4 highly flawed, incredibly fascinating working-class kids and you turn them into sanitized, untouchable, two-dimensional gods. You literally file off all the rough edges that made their journey interesting in the first place.
And if you step back and look at the big picture, that is the central struggle of their entire legacy. From the very beginning, they have been fighting against the relentless machinery that tries to package, polish, and commodify them.
The evolution of that struggle is wild to track. In 1962, they are ruthless, calculating businessmen utilizing Pierre Cardin's suits as a strategic Trojan horse to infiltrate the conservative BBC. By 1964, they are deploying Marx Brothers-style absurdist humor to psychologically survive the crushing, dangerous machinery of global fame.
Yeah, and by 1969, they retreat to the safety of the studio, only to watch the fans completely hijack their narrative through underground radio syndicates and the William Campbell death hoax.
And then by the 1970s, they are navigating corporate lawsuits over brilliant parodies while simultaneously trying to establish messy political solo careers in New York City.
At every stage of their career, they have constantly had to fight to remain actual human beings inside a rapidly expanding mythological machine. And now, in the modern era, that machine isn't controlled by record executives or radio DJs. It is controlled by streaming algorithms that demand faster, cleaner, more easily consumable narrative arcs.
Which leaves you with a lingering, somewhat unsettling question to think about long after this exploration ends. As the algorithms continue to demand these highly polished, perfectly paced 59-minute narrative chunks, what happens when the last people who actually live this messy, chaotic history are no longer here to correct the record? Will the sanitized, perfectly polished streaming era myth completely swallow the reality of who these four men actually were?